Chapter 2167. To Xiaoyang, being able to sense the location of the spirit of the world was a great piece of news. They might not understand a lot about the promotion of the world, but the world spirit was different. Some things could be said to be innate, and it might know some inside information. In the blink of an eye, the stars in front of him changed. Xiaoyang was still lying on the rattan chair, but the scenery in front of him changed. As far as his eyes could see, there was a brilliance. A beautiful figure slowly appeared at the side of the stone table. She sat there in a cultured and refined manner. The moment the world spirit appeared, Xiaoyang's eyebrows involuntarily twitched. This was because he could feel that the other party's aura had become even gentler and thicker. Such a change could be imagined to be some opportunity caused by the promotion of the world. In other words, the world spirit's strength had also increased due to the promotion of the world. "I've been in a deep sleep for the past few days. I'm really sorry to have made you panic for so long," said the beautiful figure. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. The world spirit had always been elusive. If he couldn't contact it, it must have fallen into a deep sleep. Moreover, it was also infuriating. Every time it fell into a deep sleep, its strength would increase by a lot. Of course, that was also a good thing. The stronger the world spirit became, the corresponding world would also be nourished and continuously improve its grade. However, the world spirit was always so elusive. Sometimes it was silent and uncontactable. Xiaoyang couldn't help but feel a little sad. But in the end, it was still okay and within the acceptable range. It could be said that the world spirit was an unexpected joy in Xiaoyang's life. Previously, it was an existence that provided help in a snowy weather. Sometimes, a person couldn't ask for too much. An occasional helping hand was enough. Immediately after, Xiaoyang sensed for a while and realized that the world's spiritual meridian had suddenly become much stronger. All along, Xiaoyang had been thinking about the matters after the promotion of the world, but he rarely sensed his own world. Now that he took a look, he realized that there had been such a huge change, which was very surprising. "It seems that you've improved a lot after this deep sleep," Xiaoyang said with a smile. It could be said that it was also the first time Xiaoyang smiled after the world's promotion. Of course, it was also the first good news he had received. How could he not be excited? Lu Yun nodded with a smile. It had indeed benefited a lot from this deep sleep. Even some things that it lacked in the past were made up for in this deep sleep. Although it still couldn't be compared to the flowing cloud world at its peak, it was already very difficult to let it slowly recover. Sometimes one couldn't demand too much. Only by letting nature take its course could one steadily improve. "Have we advanced to the 3,000 medium worlds?" Xiaoyang asked after a long while. It could be said that this was the question that Xiaoyang was most concerned about. He also desperately wanted to know the answer. "I think you should know very well in your heart. You can sense whether it's successful or not. Why ask?" Lu Yun replied. After receiving such an answer, Xiaoyang smiled in a simple and honest manner. He could naturally sense that without the suppression of the heavenly Tao, everything would naturally become clear. However, he couldn't be sure. Now that he had the world spirit's answer, he could be sure. Since they had successfully promoted to the world of the 3,000 small worlds, there was no need to worry too much. I remember the ancient records in the God realm. If a small world wants to promote to a medium world, it will have to fight with the medium world that is about to be replaced. But why didn't we encounter such an encounter? Xiaoyang asked. It could be said that the alliance of the four worlds had made sufficient preparations for this battle. However, this didn't happen, which was a little surprising. They couldn't figure out what was going on. It was also because of this that they felt that they hadn't successfully promoted to a medium world. One step after another. But if there was a problem in a certain step, it would make people feel that something was wrong. Lu Yun smiled and said, "This is also a small matter. I believe there are less than 3,000 medium worlds. Then, this battle naturally doesn't exist." After hearing such an answer, The corner of Xiao Yang's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Such an explanation caught him off guard. This is normal. 3,000 small worlds can give birth to a world. However, 3,000 medium worlds can only be promoted from small worlds. If there are less than 3,000, it's understandable that there is no battle, Lu Yun said with a smile. Xiao Yang still found it hard to accept such an explanation for a while. However, it would be a good thing for them if they didn't have to fight this battle. Otherwise, a battle involving the ranks of the worlds would probably be incomparably intense. At that time, the price they would have to pay would probably be very heavy. It wasn't just the lives of the cultivators, it would also consume an extreme amount of resources. The combined power of the 4 worlds could be said to be sufficient preparations. However, they didn't need to use it now, and this wealth would become their confidence. Thinking of this, Xiao Yang felt much more comfortable in his heart. Then why are we still sealed in this small world and unable to explore other worlds? Xiao Yang asked again. This was also the point that Xiao Yang was most puzzled about. Because of this restriction, he felt somewhat helpless. He even tried countless times but couldn't find an answer. This was also the point that he wanted to understand the most. This is simple to say. The promotion of a small world to a medium world is originally unequal. Therefore, if you directly appear in a medium world, you might be bullied by other worlds. Therefore, the great Tao gave you time to adapt. After this period of time, whether the other worlds are friendly or not is unknown, but whether we can resist those unfriendly worlds is our business, Lu Yun said, and his tone became much heavier. In the 3,000 small worlds, there was an existence like the profound Dou world that plundered the fate of other worlds for their own use. In the 3,000 medium worlds, the more they knew, the more intense the development of this kind of thing would be. After receiving such an answer, Xiao Yang understood in his heart. If that was the case, then all these things could be explained. As expected, in the end they were just worried for nothing. It was a false alarm. Chapter 2168. Xiao Yang's heart that was hanging in the air was now completely at ease. With the answer from the world spirit, his doubts naturally subsided. Since they could get through this safely, the losses that they originally expected naturally didn't exist. In the process of the world's advancement, they didn't suffer any losses, but they made a huge profit. However, as for how long this small world could protect them, it was still unknown. However, Xiao Yang wasn't too worried because of this. After all, the most difficult part had been skipped, so the next problem they faced would naturally be solved. It had to be said that they were indeed lucky this time. It seems that you are very happy now, Lu Yun said with a smile. Looking at the smile of the world spirit, Xiao Yang couldn't help but shiver subconsciously, because he felt that this matter was a little unusual. The 3,000 middle worlds have long been saturated. It can be seen from the fall of the realm of gods previously, Lu Yun said. Hearing this, Xiao Yang's expression changed immediately. Although there were tens of thousands of years during this period, the development of things was a little too fast. What happened in these tens of thousands of years that caused the 3,000 middle worlds to be insufficient? This question also gave Xiao Yang a headache. What's the explanation? Xiao Yang asked in a deep voice. However, as soon as he said that, Xiao Yang had an uneasy premonition in his heart. Everything was indeed not that simple, and the situation was even worse than he had imagined. It's very simple. Some worlds have been weakened for a long time and have been oppressed too much. A world has lost its most basic foundation, and the final result is naturally destruction, Lu Yun said casually. Hearing this, Xiao Yang's heart couldn't help but sink. Sure enough, it was almost the same as what he had in mind, and such a matter made him even more speechless. In the 3,000 middle worlds, many cultivators would probably be even crazier in plundering resources when they knew more about the situation. Once they went overboard, they would kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. After a world lost most of its spirit power and luck, it would be difficult for it to survive among the 3,000 middle worlds. In the end, it would collapse. As a result, the number of worlds within the 3,000 realms would naturally decrease by a lot. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang could not help but feel a chill in his heart. If that was the case, the situation they would face in the future would become even more severe. In this way, how the flowing cloud realm would survive in the 3,000 small worlds in the future seemed to have become a top priority. At least on this point, Xiaoyang was very clear in his heart. Now he had also calmed down, and the joy from before could be said to have been swept away. His previous thoughts were like an illusion that no longer existed. What they needed to face next was the most important thing. Seeing that Xiaoyang's face had become extremely ugly, the world's spirit revealed a smile. It was a good thing to pour a bucket of cold water on them now and let them calm down. When the time came, if they really encountered any major setbacks or problems, they would not have the chance to regret it. However, Xiaoyang's low mood was only temporary because, in his opinion, this matter was just a small matter. As long as he was strong enough, these problems would not be a problem. Now, you should seize the time to cultivate. Who knows when this period of protection will disappear? If you are lucky and meet a friendly neighbor, you can live in peace. If you meet someone who is extremely fanatical about war, then you and I will have to pray for ourselves. Lu Yin smiled bitterly and said, Xiaoyang and the world spirit's luck could be said to be closely related. No matter which one of them was severely injured, it was not a good thing for the other party. One's glory, one's loss, all's loss. Xiaoyang naturally understood the logic behind this. Then he nodded with a smile and said, Don't worry, I won't let you down. The world core let out a faint chuckle, which was filled with many emotions. Back then, it had thought highly of a young man, but what it received in the end was betrayal and harm. Back then, the drifting cloud world was considered a top existence among the 3,000 small worlds. However, because of that disaster, the drifting cloud world almost collapsed several times. Time revealed a person's heart. No one could say for sure. After answering a few more questions, the world spirit entered the Earth's core and continued to cultivate. When the specks of light dissipated, Xiaoyang also saw the familiar small courtyard. His fingers lightly tapped on the rattan chair as he fell into deep thought once again. The situation they were facing now did not seem optimistic. Therefore, they could not slack off at all. Therefore, Xiaoyang began to mutter in his heart. What should he do to minimize the risk? Then he waved his sleeve and stopped thinking about it. After all, when the time came, it was unknown what kind of world their world would become neighbors with. Now, they could only do their best and leave the rest to fate. Counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. Xiaoyang felt that with the God Emperor in the God world and him being a third-level martial emperor, he was rather confident. Even if he could not defeat those worlds, he still had some ability to protect himself. If he could catch his breath, it would not be a problem for him to reverse the situation in the future. At the moment, Xiaoyang still felt helpless. According to history, the drifting cloud world's strength had indeed increased by leaps and bounds. It was not an exaggeration to say that it had improved by leaps and bounds. However, that was only in comparison to the 3,000 small worlds. In the 3,000 small worlds, it was probably not enough. Then, Xiaoyang stood up and headed to the God world. Naturally, he had to inform the God Emperor about this. With this information, it was enough to calm everyone down and not continue to be in fear. With accurate information, they would also have a goal. They would not be like headless flies running around aimlessly. In the end, they still did not have a conclusion. However, when they met the God Emperor, how to explain this became a problem in Xiaoyang's heart. He had obtained these answers from the world spirit, so he couldn't possibly tell the truth, right? If that happened, it would be troublesome. Chapter 2169. After pondering for a long time, Xiaoyang finally chose to forge the ancient book. After all, back in the God world, the God Emperor had once asked him where his master was. At that time, Xiaoyang had casually made up a master in order to give himself a frightening, life-saving talisman. Who would have thought that it would come in handy today? As for forging the ancient book, Xiaoyang could be said to be at his fingertips. He was rather proficient in this. At the same time, he had also written a few more things based on the information he had obtained from the spirit of the world and his own understanding. This made the so-called ancient book look like it was real. However, when the God Emperor heard this news, he was instantly shocked. However, at the same time, he was also relieved. After all, this development was the best outcome for him. The God Emperor loved the ancient book so much that he could not put it down. The doubts in his heart had also been answered. Naturally, he was extremely happy. Fellow Xiao, when the time comes, I'll have to trouble you to invite your master over so that he can protect us, the God Emperor said with a smile. Xiaoyang smiled and shook his head. He said, I can't say for sure. My master is like a wild crane and his talent is extremely terrifying. I don't even know if he's still in the 3,000 middle worlds. Moreover, the 3,000 middle worlds are so big. Wanting to find my master is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Hearing this, the God Emperor smiled brightly. Naturally, he only half believed Xiaoyang's words. There were definitely some truths and lies in it. The sudden appearance of the ancient book was very mysterious. Although Xiaoyang had said clearly that he had accidentally found it when he flipped through the things passed down by his master, what about before? There were many suspicious points, but the God Emperor could only test it out and did not dare to use too much force. After talking for a while, Xiaoyang returned to the drifting cloud realm to cultivate in seclusion. Now that the God Emperor had reached the 3rd level of the martial Emperor realm, his expression was slightly abnormal. This made Xiaoyang feel a little wary. Therefore, as long as he was strong enough, this fear would naturally disappear without a trace. It could be said that matching strength was the last way to maintain the alliance. The other shortcuts seemed more or less unreliable. When the World Protection Period was announced, the alliance immediately calmed down. Some of the old fellows who were originally worried and sick at heart also began to go into seclusion to make a breakthrough, because they knew very well that during this period of time, their respective worlds were safe, and there was no need to worry at all. In the future, the opponents they would face would probably be even stronger. As such, increasing their strength became the top priority of every world's top combat power. Other than the Emperor God, the 9 almighty martial emperors in the 3,000 small worlds had all gone into seclusion. Not long after, an extremely exciting piece of news spread from the immortal realm. It was that the Prime Minister of the immortal realm, Zhang Zhangqing, and the leader of the 4 great heavenly generals, Duan Dongshui, had broken through together and stepped into the realm of martial emperor. With the addition of 2 martial emperors, the morale of the divine realm was greatly boosted. That was because many people knew that such an increase was definitely a qualitative change to the divine realm. Currently, there were as many as 8 martial emperors in the realm of the gods. It could be said that it was double the number of martial emperors in the other 3 worlds. That innate arrogance became even stronger because of this. In the eyes of some busybodies, there would only be more and more martial emperors in the realm of the gods. At that time, the other 3 worlds would go from being allies to being subordinate worlds. Of course, it was normal for the martial emperors in the realm of the gods to surpass the other 3 worlds. To put it simply, the realm of the gods surpassed the other 3 worlds in terms of King Wu's base of level 8. Moreover, their foundation was deep enough, and the resources they possessed were even more coveted. Moreover, the 2 spirit veins were already a huge help that could turn the situation around. Most of these opinions were expressed by some cultivators who thought that they stood at the top. And those who were in the know also knew that the spirit veins that belonged to the drifting cloud realm had appeared. The sword heart realm's sword was the sharpest. The sun snow realm seemed to have no special characteristics, but its special characteristics were the most obvious. As the crisis was resolved, the four worlds began to have some interactions with each other. Many disciples were also very curious about the other worlds, so they began to travel with each other. In this way, it was convenient for them to cultivate. If a person stayed in one place and went into closed-door cultivation, it would be too torturous. This method was indeed feasible for some almighty people who had some experience. However, for those with low cultivation, they might need to go further and see more of the ways of the world before they could comprehend it. It was also because of this that there were some small conflicts. In this way, some busybodies made a fuss about these matters and even stirred up conflicts between the two worlds. In fact, there were even some things that were expanding nonstop. The effects of those things were extremely bad. The God Emperor and Jiang Zhongqing also understood that the arrogance of the realm of the gods was innate. Many people did not know the inside story, and with their groundless arrogance, it was inevitable that they would cause trouble. Therefore, they took responsibility for many conflicts and punished their own people. In this way, the conflicts began to decrease rapidly. When the people of the other three worlds saw that the realm of the gods had such a reaction, they did not continue to pursue the matter. Because after these things, the alliance held a meeting and finally formulated some rules in order to prevent these conflicts from causing meaningless damage and loss to their alliance. After all, the future was still uncertain. It was not a wise choice to start conflicts now. Although these conflicts did not seem to be very big, when they accumulated and became a long-lasting grudge, it would be a monstrous wave that could not be stopped. Being able to nip it in the bud was the best way. In the next few years, the four worlds' travels could be said to be peaceful. Even if there were conflicts and unhappiness, it was only a personal struggle. As long as it was not in the realm of the gods, no matter where it was fine as long as it was a private fight. If it involved the matters between the sects, then the alliance would stand up to clarify the matter and then mediate. And the ones who did this were still the realm of the gods. Their words had more weight. On this day, Xiaoyang came out of closed-door cultivation. He had successfully broken through to the martial imperial realm. I didn't expect to have such a pleasant surprise when I just came out of closed-door cultivation, Xiaoyang muttered, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Chapter 2170. Relying on his senses, Xiaoyang arrived at the center of the heavenly cycle formation in the blink of an eye. When he looked up, he saw that Xiaoyang was in high spirits and full of vigor. He could be said to be unparalleled. In the past 2 years, Mu Yang had not neglected his cultivation. Furthermore, he had his own comprehension. He had successfully condensed 5 small spiritual veins and stepped into the realm of martial emperor. Looking at the old man's radiant face, Xiaoyang's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. Now, the drifting cloud world finally had a capable expert. You're too fast. I've only just broken through, and you're already here, Mu Yang said proudly. Back then, after Mu Yang had been defeated in the demon realm, his thoughts had been very simple. He had hoped that he could cultivate to the 8th level of King Wu and completely eradicate the threat of the demon realm for the flowing cloud realm. He had also felt that that was his limit. However, he had never thought that he would be able to successfully step into the realm of martial emperor. He had completed a realm that he did not even dare to imagine. Furthermore, stepping into the realm of martial emperor was only the beginning. Mu Yang firmly believed that he could take a few more steps. As for where his limit was, it was hard to say. You really know how to choose a place. The universal circulation formation can converge spiritual energy for your use. Looks like this formation was specially prepared for you, Xiaoyang said with a smile. This was something that surprised Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang had not been in control of the universal circulation formation for long, but he was able to discover its mysteries. It was clear that his talent was not bad. It was a pity that he did not have a master to guide him. Perhaps his attainments in formations would be different. With this thought in mind, Xiaoyang's eyes involuntarily lit up as he said, "Do you want to learn formations? I have a few that are suitable for you." If a cultivator could find where their talent was, they would be able to cultivate with twice the results, with half the effort. If he could reach the peak, it would be easy for him to dominate a region. Hearing this, Mu Yang's eyebrows twitched a few times. Soon after, he shook his head with a bitter smile. "What age am I? I'm afraid it's too late for me to learn now," Mu Yang said, sighing. Although Mu Yang's lifespan had increased by 10,000 years after becoming a martial emperor, he still felt that he was getting old. If he wanted to change his cultivation method at the last minute, it would be quite troublesome. Moreover, if this decision was wrong, his future would be completely delayed. At that time, it would be too late for regrets. It doesn't matter. As long as you want to learn, you will naturally succeed, Xiaoyang said, and the smile on his face became much wider. Even though Mu Yang's attitude was clear, there were times when a person lacked confidence. Without destruction, there can be no construction. Once you've thought it through, come find me at any time, Xiaoyang said. Although the heavenly cycle orderly formation was a simplified array formation created by Xiaoyang, it still had many wonderful uses. Many of them were even more sinister. However, Mu Yang was able to use it completely. From this, one could see how high his comprehension was and how great his understanding of formations was. Of course, everyone had the right to make their own choices. If Mu Yang wasn't willing, Xiaoyang wouldn't force it. "Let me think about it," Mu Yang smiled and scratched the back of his head. Right now, Mu Yang was very tempted, but he was very unconfident. He did not know if he could do it. He also knew how terrifying a wrong decision could be. However, his heart was itching, and he wanted to learn more formations. His rationality and instincts could be said to be engaged in an extremely terrifying confrontation. Seeing this, Xiaoyang did not say anything else. He turned and left. As for what Mu Yang would choose, that was his business. Xiaoyang would not interfere. Moreover, in such an intense battle, no matter which aspect he won, it would greatly improve Mu Yang's state of mind. However, if these two thoughts were balanced, his state of mind might not be as good as it was now. Fortune and misfortune came hand in hand. There was no such thing as a good choice in the world. Mu Yang sat on the spot, lost in thought. Right now, he was very conflicted and did not know how to choose. The battle of his state of mind was even more painful. Sometimes the development of things was just so strange, and it made people fall into a dilemma. After returning to his own small courtyard, Xiaoyang once again began to make arrangements for the preaching of the Tao. Now that he had broken through to the second level of the martial king realm, Xiaoyang had a new understanding. At the same time, he could only use this method to stabilize his own foundation. If he could benefit the cultivators in his own world while stabilizing his own cultivation base, why wouldn't he be happy about it? When the cultivators of the flowing cloud realm heard that Xiao Gongzhu was going to preach, the entire flowing cloud realm was in an uproar. Some cultivators who were far away in the sun snow realm or the sword heart realm immediately rushed back. This was Xiao Gongzhu's first preaching in the 3,000 middle realms, and he might have a lot of extraordinary insights. The uproar of the cultivators of the flowing cloud realm surprised many of the cultivators of the outside world. They felt that this was more or less making a fuss about nothing. The insights of a martial king realm expert were indeed extraordinary, but for low-level cultivators like them, was it really useful? This was like letting you see an incomparably bright future, but forgetting that there was a hole under your feet. If you let the ladder walk over, wouldn't you fall into the hole? It was not an exaggeration to say that this was an important part of biting off more than one could chew. The 7 days of preaching were held as scheduled, and many cultivators benefited from it. It was normal for one to be enlightened during the process of listening to the preaching. At least, it was a common occurrence in Xiaoyang's previous preaching. However, this time, there was a different person. "Thank you for your advice, Brother Xiao, for giving me this opportunity to peek into the great Tao." A man in a snow-white robe with white snowflakes in his black eyes stood up and cupped his hands with a smile. After Xiaoyang finished the last sentence of the 7 days of preaching, he saw that person. "I didn't expect Brother Luo to come too. Your presence brings light to my humble dwelling, Xiaoyang said with a smile. That person was none other than Luo Rong, one of the 4 geniuses at the Jade Pool Banquet. Xiaoyang was a little confused as to why Luo Rong would appear here. The preaching this time was on a large scale, but no one noticed his arrival. Chapter 2171. Now, Luo Rong's aura was imposing, and his spiritual power was hard to control. It was like overflowing water. This was a sign that he was about to break through. Who would have thought that this guy would come to the flowing cloud boundary without anyone noticing and join the ranks? Of course, what was even more surprising was that after he listened to Xiaoyang's teachings, he was enlightened and was able to sense the barrier between the 2 realms. Thank you for your help, sect leader Xiao. Luo Rong bowed with a smile. The corners of Xiaoyang's mouth curled into a smile. Luo Rong, who had always kept a low profile, was actually the first one to break through among the 4 of them. He had made a fortune without making a sound. Among the 4 geniuses, Lei Dingtian was the most famous, and Bai Jianfeng was the most famous. As for Han Fenglu, his low profile was just a pretense. Congratulations, fellow. Time waits for no man. If you don't mind, you can go to North Light City to break through, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Luo Rong did not stand on ceremony and said, Thank you, sect leader Xiao. After saying that, Luo Rong's figure flashed, and he headed toward North Light City. Xiaoyang did not expect that his preaching had inadvertently given Luo Rong some advice. It could be said that this was a pleasant surprise, and the relationship between the sun-snow boundary and the sun-snow boundary would be strengthened because of this. The disciples present were also very shocked. Most of them knew Luo Rong's reputation. Although they had heard of his name, they had never seen him in person. Now that they saw him, they were even more shocked. Had a martial emperor been born right next to them? Many people were even more excited. This indirectly explained one thing, and it was that sect master Xiao absolutely didn't conceal anything when he passed down the Tao. Otherwise, how could he help Luo Rong seize the opportunity? In an instant, as Luo Rong's reputation grew, Xiaoyang's reputation rose again. More people admired him. After the preaching, Xiaoyang turned and returned to North Light City. He had already done everything he could. As for how many people would benefit from this preaching, it was not something he could control. After all, everyone had their own fortuitous encounters, and no one could say for sure. Now he could only let nature take its course. He couldn't force it. After 3 to 5 days, Luo Rong successfully stepped into the Martial King realm and became the 2nd Martial King of Sun Snow Field. He was 1 step faster than the elder who was more popular. This made the whole alliance excited. The people in Sun Snow World were even more shocked because such efficiency was indeed out of their expectations. At the same time, some of them made a mental note to go and listen to Xiaoyang's teachings in the future. Maybe they could get the opportunity to break through to the martial emperor realm like Luo Rong. Stones from other mountains can be used to polish jade. After Luo Rong had broken through to the martial royal realm, he went to thank Xiaoyang. After discussing the current situation, he returned to the sun-snow realm. Before Luo Rong left, he also said that even if there was a conflict between the disciples of the Flowing Cloud Field and the Alliance, they would not interfere. When the time came, even if the matter blew up, they would still consider it carefully. Although Luo Rong kept a low profile, he was also smart. He could also see that to the current Xiaoyang, it was meaningless to promise him any benefits. After all, Xiaoyang's fighting strength was in the top 3 in their alliance. What Xiaoyang valued the most was his world. Luo Rong had done a good job of pleasing people. As time went by, and with the intentional promotion of the sun-snow field, the status of the Flowing Cloud Field and the Alliance began to rise. Even the originally arrogant deity world cultivators would sometimes deliberately restrain themselves. With Luo Rong's breakthrough and Xiaoyang's supply of spirit-gathering pills, they felt that there were benefits to be gained. Naturally, they would not dare to act rashly on account of their relationship with Luo Rong. Due to the accumulation of these seemingly trivial matters, the situation between the alliances had undergone a drastic change in people's views on certain matters. Following Luo Rong's breakthrough, the experts in the alliance began to break through one after another like bamboo shoots after a rain. Lei Dingtian followed closely behind. Luo Rong had only broken through to the martial royal realm for a month, but he had already become one of them. Even Shan Wushuang, Bai Jian, and the others had broken through to the martial royal realm. The small group of people who were at the top of the younger generation had also completely broken through to the martial royal realm, becoming the pillars of the new generation. Of course, what was more exciting was that Prince Yuda and Prince Qin had successfully broken through to the second level of martial royal realm, greatly increasing their strength. The entire alliance's strength had also become stronger because of the two princes' breakthroughs. For a moment, the entire alliance was in a state of joy. Such great news allowed them to see the alliance becoming stronger and stronger. In the future, even if they were to face the almighties of the middle world, with them around, they would still be able to contend with them. At the end of the 4th year of the new era, the barrier of the mini-world had finally dissipated, no longer separating the 4 worlds. After sensing these changes immediately, Xiaoyang opened his eyes and stopped his closed-door cultivation. He knew that the protection period of the 3,000 middle worlds for them had ended. What kind of situation they would face next would depend on how lucky they were. They had advanced from the mini-world. Although they had not experienced any battles, they had preserved all their strength. During this period of time, they had even worked hard to improve their overall strength by a lot. However, they knew nothing about the strength of the middle world. They also knew nothing about the temperament of these places. What they were about to face was a whole new environment. Now that the barrier that separates heaven and earth has disappeared, the peaceful days may be over. Lu Yun's voice rang in Xiaoyang's heart. Naturally, Xiaoyang understood this point as well. He was even more aware that reality was often cruel, and it was not as beautiful as one imagined. Some perfection only existed in stories. After experiencing so many things, Xiaoyang had an incomparably deep understanding of these things. I understand. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said solemnly, since he had brought the flowing cloud realm into the 3,000 middle worlds, he had the obligation to protect it well and not let it be attacked by any other world. My perception is limited. I can't sense what's going on around me, Lu Yun said. Chapter 2172. The world spirit was telling the truth. The only thing it could sense was its own world. As for other places, it was naturally powerless. However, they knew nothing about their surroundings, so it was inevitable that there would be some hidden dangers. Of course, they would only know if there were any hidden dangers around them after investigating. Right now, Xiaoyang didn't dare to act rashly. Right now, the flowing cloud world wasn't stable in the 3,000 middle worlds. Although they had allies, if something happened, everyone would be in a situation where they couldn't even take care of themselves. At that time, if Xiaoyang wasn't in the flowing cloud world, there wouldn't be any resistance here. Therefore, if something really happened, it would be like a destructive blow, and the consequences would be unbearable. At this moment, Xiaoyang couldn't help but feel a headache. It seemed that no matter what choice he made, he couldn't come up with a good plan. What he should do had indeed become a huge problem for him. You don't have to worry too much. After all, these things can't be predicted with just a few words. Lu Yin seemed to have seen through his companion's worries and comforted him. Xiaoyang only smiled and didn't say much. It was because there were too many unknowns that it was hard to be certain. It could be said that if something happened, it would be a big matter and they might fall into an uncontrollable situation. Under such circumstances, he didn't want to take the risk. Of course, it's safer for you to stay in the flowing cloud world. After all, on this land, you can use my power as you wish. As long as you're in the flowing cloud world, you can challenge those above your level. That won't be a problem. Lu Yun said softly. This was the truth. As the true ruler of the flowing cloud world, Xiaoyang could use these powers as he wished. However, as for how much of these powers he could use, that was a big problem. At least, he didn't have to worry about his power not being enough and could use it as he wished. Hearing this, Xiaoyang's mind calmed down a lot. With the help of the world spirit and the ability to control the world energy, then as long as he didn't encounter an opponent that was much stronger than him in the drifting cloud world, he would be invincible. Are we just going to keep waiting like this? Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. Lu Yun shook his head. In his opinion, this was indeed not a wise choice. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Although he didn't see any danger at the moment, it was still necessary to be vigilant in such an unfamiliar world. The fact that he didn't encounter any opponents during the world's advancement already explained many things. The war in the middle world would be even more brutal. Just because you can't go out doesn't mean others can't, said Lu Yin. Then, Xiaoyang understood what the world spirit meant. Right now, he indeed had to stay in the flowing cloud realm, so he couldn't act rashly. However, the others could go out and investigate. They weren't going to start a fight, they were just going out to investigate the situation. So it wasn't a big risk. After saying a few words, Xiaoyang immediately gathered Mu Yang, Chu Taiyin, and the others. He called them over to discuss this matter before making a decision. In less than 2 hours, the higher-ups of the flowing cloud realm had all gathered together. When everyone found out that the barrier protecting them had disappeared, they all had different expressions. Some people were more worried. It would be terrible if they encountered an evil neighbor. As for some people, they were extremely excited. They wanted to go out and see what the 3,000 middle worlds were like. Leader Xiao, you mean to let us go out and investigate the surrounding worlds to determine their attitude and whether they are a threat to us, right? Chu Taiyin said in a deep voice. At the same time, Chu Taiyin frowned because this wasn't a small matter. Since Xiaoyang had such an idea, it meant that there were some things that weren't certain. At the same time, they had all been invaded by the demon race in the 3,000 small worlds, so they knew how cruel the war between worlds was. Now that they could understand the other side's attitude, it seemed like a good idea. At the very least, they would be able to take precautions after knowing. That's right. Right now, I'm thinking whether Senior Chu Taiyin or Senior Muyang should do this, Xiaoyang said helplessly. In his heart, he did indeed have such a plan. As for choosing the two of them to lead, he naturally had his concerns. Muyang was a martial king right now. If he went out to investigate, he could protect himself, but it would also be easier for him to be exposed. As for Chu Taiyin, he was only at the peak of King Wu's cultivation. This was probably nothing special in the 3,000 small worlds, so it wouldn't attract the attention of others. Everyone looked at each other. This burden seemed casual and insignificant, but they understood in their hearts that this was indeed a crucial step for some bad situations, and they couldn't be careless in the slightest. After a long while, Chu Taiyin said, "Let me do this." Although it's not easy for Chu Taiyin to be exposed if something goes wrong, it'll be difficult to send news back. Even if I can't win, I'll at least have a chance to run, Mu Yang said after a long while. Mu Yang was naturally aware of Mu Yang's worries. Furthermore, Mu Yang also felt that it was best for him to handle this matter himself. Seeing that Mu Yang had volunteered, Xiaoyang smiled and nodded. Then I'll have to trouble you, Senior. Hearing that, Mu Yang's face was filled with displeasure. He had said this countless times, but Xiaoyang still kept calling him Senior. This made him feel very uncomfortable. However, he couldn't win in a fight, so there was nothing he could do. He could only let him call him Senior. Baldi, Chun Mingho, the two of you follow Senior Muyang. Listen to his orders, and don't do anything rash, Xiaoyang said. Don't worry, boss, we won't disappoint you, Baldi and Chun Mingho replied. Mu Yang smiled calmly and didn't take it to heart. To him, it was safer to have two people with him. If he had to put all his eggs in one basket, that would be the worst choice. Xiaoyang had his own reasons for making this arrangement. Baldi and Chun Mingho were born bandits, so they were sensitive to certain information. As such, with their cleverness, they might be able to save a lot of trouble. Although Muyang didn't look like a proper person, he was still a proper person and couldn't bring himself to do this. Chapter 2173. After settling this matter, Muyang brought Baldi and Qin Mingho to explore the new world. He wanted to see what their neighbors were thinking. As for the remaining matters, Sun Yukai picked out some of the more important ones and reported them to Xiaoyang, allowing him to make the final decision. As for the decisions that did not have a huge impact on the flowing cloud realm, they were completely left to them. It could be said that the Sun family's two heroes had never disappointed Xiaoyang. When the North Light City was first established, it needed to quickly expand and develop. So much so that when it came to the alliance meeting with the God Realm in several meetings, it even made the powerhouses of the other three worlds admire it because it handled things very well. With their abilities, and with their hearts set on the flowing cloud realm, Xiaoyang was naturally willing to let them do what they wanted. Of course, because the world had leveled up, there were many more things to do. The old Master Xiao and Arctic Gray Feather also began to learn from the two of them, helping to manage the flowing cloud realm's government. It could be said that in the entire flowing cloud realm, only the core circle of the North Light group followed their lead. At the same time, they had never let the flowing cloud realm down. Everything they did was true to their hearts. Xiaoyang continued to cultivate on his rattan chair. When he had free time, he would refine magic tools or go to the middle peak to nourish the land there. After the flowing cloud realm leveled up to a middle world, the middle peak's situation had greatly improved. Perhaps it was because of the spirit veins of the middle world, which allowed the land to enjoy even more benefits. Of course, it was mostly because of the leveling up of the middle world that caused the land to improve. Seeing the originally barren middle peak begin to regain its vitality, Xiaoyang revealed a trace of a smile. Presumably, in a few years' time, this place would become suitable for people to live in. After a while, it would completely recover. At that time, with all his efforts, this place would once again become the most prosperous place in the flowing cloud realm. After throwing down some seeds and setting up a few arrays, Xiaoyang went back. Not long after, Xiaoyang also received news from the Divine Emperor. He had also sensed that the barrier had disappeared. Furthermore, he had also sent out King Zhao and King to check out the surrounding environment and the situation. After hearing this news, Xiaoyang also helplessly laughed bitterly. It seemed that he had thought too much back then. Since the God Realm had already made a move, there was naturally no need for him to worry about anything. He only needed to quietly wait for news. Because the situation wasn't clear, the Alliance still maintained a state of combat readiness because their thoughts were very simple. That was, it wouldn't be too late to wait until everything was confirmed. Otherwise, if everyone went out to see this new world, the strength of their world would be scattered. At that time, once a war broke out, it would cause extremely serious consequences. This news was only known to the upper echelons of the Alliance. As for the lower echelons, they also thought that they were still under protection. Most of them were in seclusion. Now that the spiritual energy had become more abundant, in addition to the fact that there were no restrictions on luck, many people at the peak of King Wu started to have thoughts of going into seclusion. They wanted to use this opportunity to make a breakthrough. However, many of them didn't know that even in the middle world, there were still very few cultivators at the peak of King Wu who could step into the realm of Martial Emperor. Moreover, there was no such thing as naturally occurring in the realm of Martial Emperor. This wasn't something that could be made up for with simple hard work. In this realm, talent was even more important. Although the powerful people of the various worlds knew this, they didn't explicitly mention it. After all, everyone's enthusiasm was extremely high now. Sometimes a person's emotions could indeed cause a huge change in a person. Everything should just go with the flow. There was no need to deliberately change it. Moreover, the current situation was extremely delicate. Sometimes, some of the concerns of the upper echelons that had never been confirmed might cause panic among most of the cultivators in the entire alliance if word of it got out. It could be said that the powerful people of the various worlds were well aware of many problems. However, it was impossible to make it clear, because the people who went out to investigate hadn't returned with any news. The alliance still maintained its original state and didn't change any of the rules. Xiaoyang was still hiding in his small courtyard to cultivate. At the same time, he was refining his own magic weapon. During this period of time, the mountain river map had absorbed many saint-level magic weapons. Now, it had become a middle-grade saint-level magic weapon. It was one step away from being a superior-grade magic weapon. However, it wasn't an easy task to upgrade it with just that little bit of difference. The slightest mistake could lead to a great error. As for the mountain and river map, there were many differences between them. The thing that made Xiaoyang the happiest was the upgrade of the Thunder Fire Divine, Swords Grade. In these few years of refining, the world spirit had constantly nourished it and upgraded it to middle grade saint level. And this was the limit of what the world spirit could do. That was all. Of course, the world spirit was keen on this. It also understood how terrifying the enhancement of high-grade spiritual energy was to Xiaoyang. This could also better protect the drifting cloud world. As a result, the grade of the silver lightning spear couldn't keep up. More or less, it couldn't be used to its full potential. Therefore, Xiaoyang also sealed this item. Previously, Xiaoyang had thought about who to give this item to, but in the end he had to give up on this idea. Even though the silver lightning spear was inlaid with the silent thunder bead and its power was extraordinary, if Lei Dingtian were to see it, he might lose his mind and cause some trouble. Therefore, Xiaoyang didn't hesitate to put the other magic weapons that he didn't need into the storage room for Sun Yukai and Sun Dishing to distribute. After all, for the development of the world, sometimes it wasn't enough to just give away things or slogans. One needed to put in the corresponding effort to obtain treasures so that people would cherish them more. At the end of the 4th year of the new era, Xiaoyang also sensed that a cultivator from another world had come here. It wasn't a cultivator from the 4 worlds of the Alliance because his aura was more unique. In addition, his aura wasn't weak. Therefore, when he entered the drifting cloud world just now, he had already discovered him. Xiaoyang didn't know who it was, so he didn't dare to delay and immediately rushed over. Chapter 2174. Xiaoyang sensed the other party's aura very clearly. It could be said that the other party's strength was not weaker than his. Although that person had concealed his aura extremely well, he had not managed to escape his Dharma eyes. The reason was very simple. After the heart of the world turned into the world spirit, the range of its perception became wider. If the other party's strength was not strong, it would not attract his attention. However, the other party was a martial emperor expert. No matter how hard one tried to hide one's aura, it was difficult to hide one's luck. Clues would still be found out. In a short while, Xiaoyang arrived at Baixing City. He looked up and saw a man in white. The man looked very valiant, but he was dressed in white, which made him look very out of place. After the man in white sensed that he was being watched, he looked back and saw Xiaoyang. The white-robed man's lips curled into a contemptuous smile, or perhaps he was mocking himself. Soon after, the man in white opened his mouth to speak. However, when Xiaoyang heard him, he could not understand what the other party was saying. In the 3,000 small worlds, most of the languages were more or less similar. This was because the worlds had communicated for tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years. However, this was a medium world. It was normal for the languages to be different. Now that he could not understand what the other party was saying, Xiaoyang was helpless. Soon, the man in white realized that the other party was confused. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. He seemed to have realized this problem as well. He shouldn't have neglected it earlier. Suddenly, the man in white seemed to have confirmed something and laughed loudly. Such a change in attitude made Xiaoyang very confused. However, the vigilance in his heart had already risen. The stranger in front of him was of unknown origin. He did not know what the other party was thinking, so he had to be more cautious. However, even though Xiaoyang was already on guard, he was still caught off guard. The reason for this was because the other party's attack did not follow the routine at all. He did not attack Xiaoyang. Instead, he casually grabbed the head of a cultivator and held it in his hand. The sudden change caused the surrounding cultivators to be alarmed. They didn't counterattack immediately because they felt the endless pressure and couldn't move. Most of them were even trembling in fear. Now, the only people standing on this street were the uninvited guest and Xiaoyang. When everyone saw Xiaoyang, it was as if they had seen their savior. They immediately begged for help. Sect leader Xiao, this bastard is truly detestable. He pressured us with his might and killed our own. We must skin him alive and pull out his tendons. Such voices could be said to rise and fall one after another. In their eyes, Xiaoyang was like a god, an omnipotent existence. However, Xiaoyang felt very helpless in his heart. He had already spoken out to stop them at the first moment. However, in the end, it was still too late and useless. The reason for this was very simple. The other party couldn't understand what Xiaoyang was saying. Of course, he didn't care about the other party. Instead, he directly crushed the cultivator's head. For a moment, the anger in Xiaoyang's heart could be said to have reached its peak. He clenched his fists tightly and his desire to fight rose. The other party had committed a crime right under his nose and killed the people of the flowing cloud boundary. This was a bit too unreasonable. The man in white casually swung his hand, and the blood on his hand was flung away. I didn't think you would sense my arrival so quickly. The man in white spoke in a very stiff tone. Just now, the man in white used his technique to search the soul of the disciple who was attacked. He immediately knew what the people of the flowing cloud boundary were talking about. Martial emperors paid attention to the spiritual soul. Therefore, they had a unique understanding of this. To be able to do this was like taking something out of a pocket. It was effortless. Moreover, this person's cultivation was higher than Xiaoyang's. You've gone too far, Xiaoyang said angrily. The man in white still smiled disdainfully and said, You're only a second-level martial emperor. What right do you have to be arrogant in front of me? As soon as he said this, everyone's hearts couldn't help but tremble. This person was able to see through Xiao Gongzhu's cultivation with a single sentence. Then, how terrifying would his cultivation be? After this thought appeared in everyone's mind, they felt that the situation had changed greatly. This person's cultivation was stronger than Xiao Gongzhu's. Originally, I sensed that there was a spiritual vein in this world and thought it was pretty good. I didn't expect that you're the only martial emperor. Even King Wu's peak can only be counted on one hand. The man in white said and couldn't help but shake his head. That look of disappointment was even more vividly displayed. That's true. You've ascended from the 3,000 small worlds. Compared to our medium worlds, you're not very powerful. It's normal that there's a huge gap. The man in white's tone was still very stiff, but he laughed after saying this. His message was filled with disdain and complicated emotions. At least, Xiaoyang didn't sense any kindness from his message. It could be said that the man in white killed the people of the drifting cloud realm in one move. He definitely wasn't a kind person. Of course, there was another possibility. To some almighty, those below the martial emperor realm were merely ants. Sometimes it wasn't a big deal to casually crush an ant to death. I just didn't think that you could ascend to the medium worlds. It seems like the 3,000 small worlds are in ruins, the man in white said. Hearing these words, Xiaoyang's eyebrows furrowed. At the same time, he immediately began to communicate with the world spirit to see if there was any way to expel this person. Since blood had been spilled, this matter naturally couldn't be let go so easily. Therefore, Xiaoyang was prepared. However, after a battle between martial emperors, even though the world's strength had been greatly improved after its ascension, once the battle started, Baixing City would probably become a ruin. The numerous disciples here would most likely suffer an unexpected calamity because of this, and their bodies and Tao would vanish. I thought it was a guest, so I was naturally happy. I didn't expect it to be a murderer like you. Xiaoyang said through gritted teeth. Chapter 2175. When the man in white heard this, the smile on his face became even more contemptuous. In his eyes, this young man was really boasting shamelessly. How dare he say such words to him? It seemed that he was used to being a tyrant in the 3,000 small worlds, so he did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Did he still think that he was in their small circle? If he thought about it this way, it seemed to be not bad. What did they understand? Boy, how dare you say that I'm a murderer? Oh, it seems that you're tired of living. There was no anger in the man in white's voice, but there was a bit of playfulness in his expression. At the same time, Xiaoyang also subconsciously mobilized his strength. Since he dared to kill people in Baixing City, then he was definitely not a good person. At least, Xiaoyang would not let this matter go so easily. After all, a life for a life, a debt must be paid. This was an eternal principle. So what if you were a mighty figure in the middle world? Moreover, this was his drifting cloud world, not a place of disunity. I've been in the middle world for tens of thousands of years, but this is the first time I've met such a strange person like you. Why don't you go out and ask about my name, Bailey Kwong? The man in white said coldly. When Xiaoyang heard this, his eyebrows furrowed slightly. The other party's attitude was still so arrogant. Even after killing people, he did not care, as if he was crushing an ant. It could be seen that they were the most stubborn group of people who respected strength. They would not treat those cultivators as friends. As long as one's strength was weaker than them, they would be like an ant in their eyes. And such a person, in Xiaoyang's opinion, even if he killed him, it was not important. So what if he caused some trouble because of this? After all, they were the ones who started the dispute first, not the drifting cloud world. I just killed an ant. I also know that you have the skill of gathering people's hearts. Now you're confronting me because you want to live up to your identity as the Lord. What was this little bit of fame to him? Even if you enjoy the most abundant resources in this world, so what? Your small world is lacking in materials. It's even difficult to find a cultivation teacher. You must have had a hard time cultivating to this level by yourself. Bai Li laughed wildly. With regards to these words, Xiaoyang was dismissive. As long as you kneel down, acknowledge me as your master, and lead this world to submit to me, I will ensure the safety of your world. Bailey Kwong's voice was filled with authority at this moment. In Bailey Kwong's opinion, there were indeed not many talented people in the 3,000 small worlds. However, those who could bring their own worlds up were all people with extraordinary talents. If he could nurture them well and make them his lackeys, he would be able to roam the 3,000 middle worlds in the future. You villain! You still haven't given my drift cloud world an explanation, yet you're already speaking such arrogant words. How arrogant of you! Xiaoyang frowned coldly and spoke in a ghastly tone. The other party's attitude was indeed somewhat unbearable for Xiaoyang. In fact, he was already prepared for it. However, he was still waiting for the world spirit to complete the last step, so that when he started the battle, the drift cloud world would not be harmed by the repercussions of the battle. Bailey Kwong did not get the answer he was satisfied with, and his face was instantly filled with rage. At this moment, his aura was no longer concealed, and an endless amount of pressure poured out. In an instant, the disciples who had fallen around him felt that it was extremely difficult to breathe. It was as if they were being suppressed by a huge mountain. Such a terrifying feeling made the disciples understand in their hearts. This was definitely a powerful opponent. Otherwise, why didn't Xiaogong Zhu attack and kill him? However, many people still believed that Xiaogong Zhu did not dare to act rashly because he was afraid of breaking the vases. Have you thought about the consequences of angering me? Bailey Kwong said word by word. Bailey Kwong was extremely dissatisfied with this junior's attitude. Furthermore, there was a limit to his tolerance. Originally, he wanted to be kind and use gentle means to subdue this side of the world. However, He did not expect them to use such a method. There was a price to pay for going against his plan and actions. Moreover, the price would definitely not be small. Looking at the other party's attitude, Xiao Yang could not help but gasp. Bailey Kwong had only released his aura, and it was already so terrifying. If he really attacked, how many times could the Baixing city under his feet withstand? After the drift cloud world had been promoted to a middle world, the quality of the land had indeed undergone a qualitative change. However, it was still undergoing the same changes now. Once the battle started here, Baixing City would probably be destroyed in an instant. Almost half of the disciples of the North Light City and the outstanding disciples of the other forces were here. Once the battle started, it would be difficult for them to escape. After Bailey Kwong's aura leaked out, Chu Taiyin, Ji Fei, Xiao Changxing, and the others immediately sensed it. However, they stood 10 miles away and did not dare to come closer at all. If they continued to move forward, they would be affected by the pressure. They also understood that the uninvited guest's strength was extremely terrifying. It was definitely not someone they could fight against. At least, they could tell from Xiao Yang's current attitude that he was ready to fight. All the cultivators of the Martial Emperor realm and above in the God world, Sword Heart world, and Snow Sun world also sensed the aura. Immediately, the God Emperor also mobilized his men and sent them to the Drift Cloud world to support Xiaoyang. This was to prevent any mishaps from happening. You're so arrogant. If you continue to have such an attitude, then we have nothing to talk about. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said coldly. Bailey Kwong laughed wildly. His laughter was loud and wild. This was because he felt that this young man's words were completely like a newborn calf that was not afraid of a tiger. I'm just so arrogant. What can you do to me? Bailey Kwong said mockingly. There was even a hint of provocation in his eyes. He did not believe that a mere second-order Martial Emperor realm cultivator could cause any trouble. Moreover, this was just a joke. How could a clown dare to make a ruckus? If a person wanted to boast, if he did not have the corresponding strength as the foundation, then he would only be a joke in the end. A joke that would make people laugh their teeth off. What can I do to you? I'll just pay with my life. Xiaoyang said indifferently. His tone was very calm. Chapter 2176. When Bailey Kwong heard this, he almost lost control of his laughter. He really could not understand. This young man was only a second-level Martial Emperor. How could he have such thoughts? This person was really a frog at the bottom of a well. Did he think that he was invincible? However, in the next moment, Bailey Kwong could not laugh anymore. This was because he felt that his aura was suddenly targeted by this world. It was as if everything was going against him. He felt extremely uncomfortable. Then, Bailey Kwong could not control himself. He was being rejected by this world. Of course, it wouldn't be a problem if he wanted to force himself to stay here. However, at this moment, the frog at the bottom of the well who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth made his move. Bailey Kwong knew very well that if he fought here, he would be restricted everywhere. It would be difficult for him to unleash his full strength. Therefore, he had no choice but to be careful. He immediately retreated. And these restrictions were all made by the world spirit. If it wanted to force a Martial Emperor out, it would be difficult for it to do so with its current strength. However, it would not be a problem for it to make him leave on his own accord. Xiao Yang followed, closely behind Bailey Kwong. Moreover, he had only attacked at the beginning to force Bailey Kwong to retreat and move the battle away from 100 Prosperity City. As long as they did not harm the Flowing Cloud Realm, even if they fought until the sky turned dark, it was nothing. In an instant, Bailey Kwong had retreated over 1,000 miles away. The suppression that he felt had completely disappeared at this moment. He immediately stopped his footsteps. Xiao Yang hovered in the air, glaring angrily. After the disciples of Baixing City felt that the coercion had disappeared, one by one they immediately stood up and started to voice their complaints. There was also a group of people who were glad to have survived the disaster. Xiao Changxing's brows were tightly knitted together as he said, "What can we do? It could be said that they had no idea how strong their opponent was this time. At the very least, with their current strength, they could not help at all. If they acted rashly, they might even cause trouble for Xiaoyang. Cultivator Ji Fei, quickly go to the God realm and ask for help from the God Emperor, Chu Taiyin said decisively. Hearing this, Ji Fei also understood the importance of this matter. As he nodded, he had already turned around and left for the God realm. The Emperor God was now a third-level martial emperor. He could be said to be the strongest among the martial emperors. If he came over to hold the fort, they might be able to repel the invading enemies. As for how terrifying the enemy's strength was, they didn't know. However, when he saw Xiaoyang's serious expression, it was clear that this matter was not so simple. If he could have one more helper, then this matter would naturally be much safer. Troubled times. I didn't expect all of this to come so quickly. Chu Taiyin helplessly laughed bitterly. How long had it been since Mu Yang had gone out to scout the surroundings? He didn't expect enemies to arrive so soon. Perhaps there would be even more in the future. Furthermore, their strength had not increased at all. Regarding this, First Lunar could not help but feel a headache. If they could increase their strength a little faster, Xiaoyang wouldn't be in a situation where he was all alone right now. Xiao Changxing also smiled helplessly and said, "In the end, we are old. We can't compare to those young people." "Can we be as old as Senior Muyang?" Chu Taiyin asked in return. After hearing these words, Xiao Changxing was choked to the point of speechlessness. In that case, it did make sense. In the end, they could only attribute all of this to the fact that they had been too comfortable during this period of time, which was why they had slacked off on their cultivation. High in the sky, Xiaoyang and Bailey Kuang had not completely left the range of the flowing cloud world's control. However, this place was safe enough. They would not accidentally injure the flowing cloud world. "Weren't you aggressively trying to attack me just now?" "What? You don't dare to attack me now," Bailey Kuang sneered. Bailey Kuang was very displeased with the young man in front of him. As such, he had no intention of taking him as a disciple. However, if he could make this person submit, then he would be able to control this small world. Bailey Kuang had learned from the divine souls of the people he had killed that Xiaoyang was the lord of the flowing cloud world. His reputation and prestige could be said to be extremely high. In fact, most people's attitude towards him was like a fanatic. If he had someone like this as his lackey, then it would naturally be a lot easier to rule. Xiaoyang let out a cold laugh and frowned. Instantly, his entire body was shaken. The breath of spirit immediately rose up and flowed through his entire body. For a moment, he was in high spirits. Against an opponent of the third-level Martial King realm and someone from the middle world. How could Xiaoyang dare to be careless? Therefore, when he attacked, he had to use his full strength, because this was the only way to win. Even though Xiaoyang could use the flowing cloud world's power of the world, if he did not have to use it, then he would not use it. After all, once he became dependent on the power of the world, it would not be good. Moreover, if he used the power of the world too much, then some clues would be revealed. At that time, it would be hard to avoid being exposed. The biggest secret of the flowing cloud world, in Xiaoyang's opinion, was the world spirit. Regarding this matter, he naturally had to be careful. He could not afford to make any mistakes. Xiaoyang had tried many times before. He also believed that with his strength of the second-level Martial King realm and many mysterious techniques, it would not be too big of a problem to deal with this person. "Ah, it seems like you are a dog that bites, but does not bark." Bailey Kuang's expression was still as mocking as ever. However, in the next moment, Bailey Kuang was in high spirits. He knew that such a person was extremely terrifying. If he did not attack, then he would not attack. Once he attacked, then he would kill his opponent. Although Bailey Kuang did not believe that his opponent could kill him. However, if his opponent's stubbornness caused him to be seriously injured, then it would not be good. When this news spread back to his own world, he would become a joke. In Bailey Kuang's world, strength was more important. In his world, it was very simple to be in a high position. Your fist was the right to speak. In fact, the rules in his world were even more cruel. Xiaoyang didn't reply. Instead, he rushed forward and threw a punch at him. This attack looked very simple, but there were endless variations. Chapter 2177. Ha! You want to compete with me with your fists? You're really a frog at the bottom of a well. Bailey Kwong laughed disdainfully. Immediately, Bailey Kwong threw out a punch. Instantly, an extremely powerful spiritual energy poured out and turned into a powerful qi. It was extremely terrifying. Fortunately, they were in the 3,000 small worlds. Otherwise, in a small world, this kind of qi would be enough to tear the void apart and even cause the space to collapse. In the face of such a ferocious punch, Xiaoyang did not retreat even an inch. He could also feel the strength of the punch, but he also threw out a punch of his own. There was no turning back. Moreover, he was very confident and did not think that he would lose to Bailey Kwong in this punch. Boom! Although the qi was fierce, it was scattered by Xiaoyang's punch. It could not be controlled at all. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang's figure became even more strange and fast. When Bailey Kwong saw this, he knew that things were not good. I didn't expect him to be a body-refining cultivator and have such achievements. He's really powerful. Bailey Kwong thought in his heart and threw out a punch. With a muffled sound, the two fists collided. Suddenly, a huge force exploded. Both of them could not control themselves and retreated. They retreated a few miles. It was obvious how terrifying the force of their fists was. It could be said that neither of them showed mercy. Their attacks were even more ferocious, and they went all out. Xiaoyang stood still, and his right hand could not help but tremble slightly. Although his body was strong, he was still a little weak in the face of a third-level martial king. Moreover, the rich, rebounding force made him realize that Bailey Kwong was also a body-refining cultivator. Otherwise, an ordinary third-level martial king might not be able to withstand his punch. Good boy. You can cultivate to such a level with such a weak body. You're really extraordinary. Bailey Kwong shook his arm and laughed. At this moment, Xiaoyang's mind started to think quickly. As for the other party's strength, he was able to figure it out. The other party didn't use any techniques in the beginning. Instead, he used brute force to fight back. It was clear that he was someone who focused on body refinement. If that was the case, he could give it a try. Both of them were physique cultivators, and the other party's cultivation was higher, so it wouldn't be bad to let the other party be his whetstone on the path of physique cultivation. Ever since I stepped into the martial royal realm, I haven't used all my strength in a battle. Today, I'll use you to test my strength and see how strong I really am. Xiaoyang thought to himself as the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Now, Xiaoyang had already made his considerations clear. To sharpen his martial arts, he needed such an excellent whetstone. However, don't you think you're indulging in fantasy if you think you can shake me just like that? If a frog at the bottom of a well comes to the mainland and still looks at the current world with the same vision as before, then he is truly a fool. Bailey Kwong sneered. As Bailey Kwong spoke, the energy in his body began to surge. After confirming the other party's cultivation and ability, he didn't dare to be too lax. After all, people who practice body refinement were all ruthless. If they weren't ruthless, they wouldn't have chosen physique cultivation. There were many physique cultivation techniques, but most of them had a process of self-harm. If they weren't ruthless enough, how could they attain a higher realm and a tougher body? Let's give it a try and we'll know. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. Xiaoyang said coldly. Bailey Kwong's violent killing could be said to have crossed the line in Xiaoyang's heart. Once they crossed the line, there would be no possibility of reconciliation between them. It was just a matter of you dying and I dying. He didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Since Bailey Kwong had touched the people of the drifting cloud boundary, as the ruler of this world, he naturally had to seek justice for his people. If the difference in strength was too great, then Xiaoyang could only swallow his anger and wait for an opportunity to appear before he could make a move. However, the difference in strength between them wasn't that great. As such, he naturally had to seek justice for this. "Kid, what you said is really funny. It's just an ant. There's no need to be so serious." Bailey Kwong laughed. In his opinion, there were too many jokes in this world. The person that he had casually squashed to death was merely an ant. He was not even Xiaoyang's blood relative. Furthermore, he was not even a disciple of Xiaoyang's sect. He was merely someone from another sect. Why was he so angry? Seeking justice for an ant? No matter how he thought about it, it was incomparably ridiculous. It could even be said that it went against common sense. According to what you said, in my eyes, you're just an ant. Therefore, does that mean that I can easily crush you into pieces? Xiaoyang suddenly said with a contemptuous smile. Hearing this, Bailey Kwong was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed again. "Why is your name more arrogant than mine? Aren't you afraid that the wind will blow your teeth out?" Bailey Kwong said. He was just a mere second-level martial emperor. Even if he had some strength, so what? Yet, this brat was boasting shamelessly. It was truly a little laughable. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, "Maybe I don't believe it." "Then I'll knock your teeth out." Bailey Kwong's expression suddenly changed, and he shouted angrily. In the next moment, the two of them charged forward again and prepared to continue the fight. Bailey Kwong's laughter was just to mock his opponent. However, the anger in his heart was real. This kid, who didn't know his place, actually compared him to an ant. How could he not be angry? In his own world, Bailey Kwong was also in existence with a high status. Now that he was being mocked by a newly promoted world, how could he tolerate it? In an instant, the sound of explosions was heard continuously. The fight between the two of them could be said to be extremely fierce. Not long after, two people rushed over and stopped when they were 10 miles away from the fight. The two people who came were a man and a woman. The woman's expression immediately turned grave when she saw the strength of the battle. She had never thought that the opponent this time would be so ferocious. "Good fellow. I didn't expect Xiaoyang's physical strength to be so strong. He directly met force with force." The man laughed. The woman said coldly, "In the small world, he was almost invincible with just his physical strength." Chapter 2178. After Bailey Kwong released his aura, the God Emperor sensed a change in the situation. However, because King De and King Qin had gone out to investigate, the God Emperor could not leave the God realm easily. Moreover, there was a precedent. He did not know if there would be other cultivators invading, so he could only send Princess Mingzhu and Unrivaled God to help. Princess Mingzhu had entered the Martial Emperor realm long ago, and with Unrivaled God, who had just entered the Martial Emperor level, such a lineup could be said to be luxurious. However, after Princess Mingzhu arrived, she realized that Bailey Kwong's ability was not as simple as they thought. At least, from the aftermath of the battle, she could sense that the opponent's level was higher than hers. "I'm afraid the enemy's level is level 3 Martial Emperor," Princess Mingzhu said softly. Unrivaled God could not help but frown when he heard that. If that was really the case, then their rescue this time might not have much meaning. At least, Unrivaled God would be a burden if he took action in front of such a huge gap between their levels. At the same time, Unrivaled God was even more surprised that Xiaoyang could take on a level 3 Martial Emperor opponent by himself. From this, it could be seen how terrifying his strength was. Unrivaled God was shocked when he thought of that. It seemed that the person he had chosen for the God Realm back then was not bad. Although he did not join the God Realm, the fact that he was an ally was enough to explain a lot. Should I go back and report to the God Emperor? Unrivaled God thought for a moment and asked in a low voice. Even Unrivaled God was helpless when faced with such an opponent. However, he thought that if the God Emperor could take action, he might not be at a disadvantage in a battle between people of the same level. Even if he could not kill his opponent, he could at least force him to retreat. Princess Mingzhu shook her head and said, "There's no rush. Let's watch first." Unrivaled God was a little uneasy when he heard that. Were they going to stand aside and watch this battle? However, Unrivaled God did not know that Princess Mingzhu wanted to use this opportunity to see how powerful Xiaoyang was. She did not ask for help because she was confident that if she joined forces with Xiaoyang, even if the opponent was a third-order martial emperor, it would not be impossible for them to defeat him. Moreover, there was only Xiaoyang alone, and they were already evenly matched. If he were to join in, then the balance would naturally tilt, and he might even be able to obtain victory. This battle could also be said to be the first opponent that the Alliance of the Four Worlds had encountered since they had been promoted to the Middle World. There was no room for the slightest mistake. Fame and status were something that needed to be earned with one's fists. Moreover, if the strongest among them were to make a move at the beginning, then their future days would be difficult because of this. How long do you want to watch? Unrivaled God asked rather anxiously, although the current battle seemed to be going back and forth, and Xiaoyang didn't seem to be at a disadvantage at all. However, he was still a third-order martial emperor after all. Wait until that person is prepared to use his full strength. Princess Mingzhu took a deep breath and said, her opponent had yet to use his full strength, and he even seemed to be toying with them. Therefore, Princess Mingzhu felt that there was no need for her to make a move. Moreover, it was fine for her to wait a little longer. At the same time, Princess Mingzhu could tell that Xiaoyang was also using his opponent's level and ability to train himself in martial arts. Now that he was having fun, it didn't seem right for her to disturb him. At the very least, that was not advisable. So what if his opponent's cultivation base was higher than his own? However, she was more ambitious than him, and she could even control the battle at her own pace. That was the most terrifying thing about her. That was also why Princess Mingzhu was determined not to ask her father to come. With such a powerful companion, she did not think that she couldn't defeat him. Unrivaled God really did not understand what Princess Mingzhu was thinking, but he could only worry helplessly at the moment. If it weren't for the difference of 2 levels and the fact that his foundation was still a little shaky, he would definitely not wait any longer. He would immediately help Xiaoyang share the burden. Bailey Quang had long sensed the arrival of the 2 martial emperors, but he only laughed disdainfully in the end. He did not take it to heart at all. In the martial emperor level, 2 rank 2 martial emperors and 1 rank 1 martial emperor would not be equal to a rank 5 martial emperor's ability. They were 3 levels higher than him. So what if they had more people? However, if they were not powerful enough, they would only have 1 more person die. Looks like you're not on good terms with them. The alliance between you 2 is a joke. It's just a plate of loose sand, Bailey Quang mocked as he forced Xiaoyang to retreat with a punch. Based on the information he had received earlier, Bailey Quang was able to confirm many of his questions. They just think that you're no match for me, Xiaoyang sneered and said. Hearing those words, Bailey Quang was about to go crazy. Unrivaled God, on the other hand, chuckled bitterly. Xiaoyang's psychological tactics were truly extraordinary. As soon as he spoke, he provoked Bailey Quang so much that he could not control himself. Princess Mingzhu was not very interested in these verbal exchanges. Instead, she was watching the flow of the 2's auras, watching the battle between others. He could also benefit greatly from it. It might be difficult for others to see any clues, but Princess Mingzhu was different. Their levels were about the same. In addition to her talent, she could learn a lot from every battle. Even during the Realm of God's Grand Tournament, she had personally watched the battles and learned something. Although it was not a lot, she was very satisfied. It was just a small step that led to 1,000 miles. Sharp-tongued brat, are you trying to provoke me with these words? Bailey Quang roared. Hearing this, Xiaoyang only smiled. He really did not care about what Bailey Quang was thinking. No matter what kind of reaction Bailey Quang made, he would think that it was within his expectations. There was nothing strange about it. Seeing Bailey Kwong's calm expression, Bailey Kwong was furious. It seemed that Bailey Kwong would not know how terrifying his ability was if he did not show some of his trump cards. A frog at the bottom of a well could not see the light of day. Naturally, he would not understand what it meant to be a bright moon hanging high in the sky and what it meant to be a firefly. The difference between the two was difficult to distinguish. Sky-shattering Vajra Fist. Chapter 2179. From the previous fight, Bailey Kwong had already realized that Xiao Yang's physical strength was on par with his own. It would be meaningless to continue fighting. In addition, this kid had a perfect grasp of psychological attacks, which made him very annoyed. However, Bailey Kwong felt that as long as he could beat the crap out of Lin Huang, his so-called confidence and composure would crumble right away. He might even gain more benefits if he continued to torture them. If he could crush the morale of these four worlds and then defeat the strongest person in the middle, he would be able to complete the magnificent feat of conquering for many worlds by himself. By then, even though his ability would be slightly weaker than those old fellows, this achievement would be enough to earn him a higher status and better resources. It would not be a problem for him to take another step forward then. At the very least, judging from the fact that the other party had rushed over to help but chose to stand by and watch, their relationship was probably just a temporary alliance. If something were to go wrong, the alliance would probably vanish into thin air. In the face of disaster, they would just go their separate ways. Immediately, Bailey Kwong began to gather his strength in a frenzy. Countless amounts of energy continued to condense between his fists. As the energy gathered, even the space around him seemed to be greatly affected and became slightly distorted. The murderous aura was even more uncontrollable. It poured out in a frenzy, making anyone who sensed it feel extremely uncomfortable. Even though Xiao Yang's cultivation base was not weak, he was feeling some pressure now. On the other hand, Princess Mingzhu waved her hand casually and a sword appeared in her hand. Her opponent was about to show his true strength, so naturally, she could no longer continue to watch from the sidelines. Once Xiao Yang was suppressed, it would be difficult for him to turn the tables. Moreover, their aura could not be weaker than their opponents. It was only by maintaining this that they could retain a sliver of a chance to win. Xin Wushuang glanced sideways, and his expression became much more solemn. This was because he could already feel the immense pressure before the punch had even been thrown. If that punch was really thrown out, what kind of terrifying power would it have? He also felt that it was something unimaginable. In the blink of an eye, Bailey Kwong let out an explosive roar as he threw out a punch. Suddenly, an incomparably huge fist, glowing with golden light, rushed out, heading towards the seemingly insignificant young man. It was as if he would be smashed into smithereens by this punch. Seeing this, Xiao Yang frowned. The attack he had prepared was already completed. Fist breaking 1,000 refinements. Xiao Yang bellowed. Immediately, he faced the surging fist aura. However, he did not retreat half a step. Instead, he charged forward. Although Xiao Yang's punch did not look as powerful as Bailey Kwong's, it was extremely pure. You're really a frog at the bottom of the well. Bailey Kwong's laughter. At this moment, Bailey Kwong felt as if victory was right in front of him. That brat was just courting death without knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Unrivaled God took a deep breath and stared at the screen without blinking. Princess Mingzhu's hand was already on the hilt of her sword. If there was a need, she would attack immediately to ensure that nothing went wrong. At the very least, she could not watch Xiao Yang be at a disadvantage or even be injured. Only when the two of them were at their peak could they defeat their opponent. If any of them were injured, then this matter would become much more difficult. Although Princess Mingzhu was waiting, she had to ensure that the situation was balanced. If there was a huge outpouring, her hesitation would cause her to miss a good opportunity and even cause her to lose everything. That kind of method could be said to be incomparably risky, so she naturally wouldn't do that. However, what everyone saw was Xiao Yang's punch shaking the gigantic golden fist. He threw a punch straight in. It was like a hot knife through butter. Bailey Kwong's eyes widened in anger when he saw this. He was also in disbelief. Was this guy's strength really so terrifying that he could forcefully break through his martial skill? There was a gap of 1 level between them. Was this really possible? At this moment, Bailey Kwong was completely dumbfounded. He felt that everything he saw in front of him was somewhat surreal. At the very least, he found it hard to accept. Unrivaled God, on the other hand, was dumbfounded. He did not expect this brother of his to be so dauntless. Even when facing an opponent 1 level higher, he was still able to display an unparalleled strength. All of a sudden, Unrivaled God thought of another possibility. Back in the 3,000 small worlds, if Xiaoyang had not been suppressed by the great Tao, how terrifying would his full strength have been? Wouldn't he be on par with the Emperor God? Unrivaled God thought to himself inexplicably. He felt that it was highly possible. Even when he was suppressed, he could still defeat Emperor Qin. When King Wu was at his peak, he could even kill a martial emperor powerhouse. This person was truly a monster. It was as if he had been doing the impossible all this time. Bailey Kwong began to feel a little surprised when he sensed that his power was being worn down and dispersed. He also realized that this seemed to have exceeded his expectations. What's the big deal about this? Could it be that the gap between the levels was like a decoration that was completely useless? The more he thought about it, the more upset Bailey Kwong felt. He found it difficult to accept such a turn of events. However, Bailey Kwong was not an indecisive person. Immediately, he threw another punch. He wanted to see if this young man's strength was truly as terrifying as he thought it was. Booming sounds continued to ring out. The first punch had been broken. Xiaoyang's aura remained undisturbed. At the same time, he arrived and threw another punch at Bailey Kwong. Boom! The two forces exploded once again. The rebounding force caused both of them to retreat uncontrollably. However, this time, Bailey Kwong retreated even further. It was obvious that he was at a disadvantage in this exchange. Bailey Kwong gritted his teeth as he glared at the little guy. He could no longer contain his anger. He was actually at a disadvantage in this exchange. If news of this were to spread, it would be a disgrace. How could he establish himself in his own world in the future? For a moment, there was an extremely strong energy fluctuation around Bailey Kwong. Chapter 2180. Xiaoyang hovered in the air. He did not chase after his opponent to his heart's content. It was not that he did not want to end the battle quickly, but he had to pay a price for charging forward bravely. Now, all the meridians and bones in his body had been attacked. He was in excruciating pain and could not control himself. After all, his opponent was a 3rd-level martial emperor powerhouse. How could he be defeated so easily? To Xiaoyang, being able to gain a slight advantage was already an extremely difficult matter. Bailey Kwong was enraged. In his opinion, this kind of thing could not be spread. As long as the people who saw this were all dead, then this matter would naturally not spread. And these humiliations would be covered up. It could be said that even Bailey Kwong did not expect a 2nd-level martial emperor to be so powerful. This was completely out of his expectations. Brat, you're really strong. You have the right to be arrogant, Bailey Kwong said angrily. At this point, Bailey Kwong admitted that he was his opponent. Correspondingly, he would be ruthless to his opponent. The previous battle was just child's play to Bailey Kwong. Next, the real battle would begin. Xiaoyang quickly adjusted the energy in his body. As long as he could recover faster than his opponent, he could still attack with lightning speed. In fact, it was not impossible for him to win directly because of this. However, the excruciating pain that came from all over his body made the circulation of his spiritual power a little intermittent. Princess Mingzhu was not in a hurry to attack because Xiaoyang had the upper hand earlier. Therefore, she had her own considerations. Shen Wushuang was extremely anxious. This was a great opportunity. Why was she not attacking? On the battlefield, one only cared about winning. Sometimes, if one thought too much, it would be the root of a disaster. Moreover, his opponent was at the third-level martial emperor powerhouse. The strongest among them was only level 2. In the end, Shen Wushuang could only feel helpless. After all, he could not understand the thoughts of these almighties. Everyone had their own misgivings. Thus, they all had to carefully consider their actions, and did not dare to act rashly. Sometimes in a confrontation, a small mistake could become your weakness. Therefore, it would continue to be magnified until it was out of control. It would become a foreshadowing of defeat. That would not be strange at all. Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu had similar views. If they rashly attacked now, they might even fall into the enemy's trap. As a third-order martial emperor, how could he not have his own trump card? Therefore, no matter what, he had to be careful. In the blink of an eye, some clouds and lightning appeared around Bailey Kwang's body. Although they were very small, one could tell that the power contained within them was extremely terrifying. At the same time, Bailey Kwang's body began to change. His body was constantly expanding, and hair was constantly growing on his skin. Seeing this unforeseen event, the two of them could not help but be shocked in their hearts. "What are you doing?" The corner of Shen Wushuang's mouth twitched. He really could not understand what was happening in front of him. What was happening now was indeed incomprehensible. He did not understand why things had turned out this way. The middle world was so big that it surpassed the 3,000 small worlds by leaps and bounds. Naturally, it was full of wonders. Princess Mingzhu said, "He's not human. I'm afraid he's some kind of ferocious beast or spirit." Hearing this, Shen Wushuang was stunned. He did not understand. In the great Tao, although our human bodies are the weakest existences, our bodies are the weakest. However, it's the most suitable for cultivation. Therefore, many ferocious beasts and spirits would deliberately cultivate into a human form and open their 7 orifices during cultivation. Princess Mingzhu said. Hearing this, Shen Wushuang understood. In other words, although they've obtained higher talent and affinity with Tao by cultivating into a human form, their abilities will also be limited to a certain extent, Shen Wushuang said. Princess Mingzhu nodded. That was indeed the case. In the next moment, unrivaled God smiled wryly as well. If Bailey Kwang were to reveal his true form, his ability would no longer be restricted. When that happened, how terrifying would he be if he could display all his abilities? It seemed like their carelessness had resulted in a miscalculation. Xiaoyang finally understood why Bailey Kwang's body was so strong. It turned out that he was a ferocious beast. I'm very curious. Are you also a ferocious beast? Bailey Kwang said angrily. Xiaoyang shook his head and said no. Hearing this, Bailey Kwang found it difficult to understand. How could a human with a weak body cultivate such a strong body? This was also the reason why Bailey Kwang had held back earlier. If Bailey Kwang was the same kind, it would be easier to get along with him in the future. Since he had confirmed that Bailey Kwang was not the same kind, what harm was there in killing him? Soon, Bailey Kwang's true form was completely revealed. Bailey Kwang's true form was a gigantic white bear. It was more than 100 feet tall, and its arms were thicker than an adult man's body. There were even sparks of lightning surrounding the white bear. It looked even more terrifying. The gigantic white bear stood there as if it was a giant that could not be shaken. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was a mountain. Looking at the gigantic white bear, the corner of Shen Wushuang's mouth twitched involuntarily. Just its fur alone looked like steel needles. How strong would its flesh be? Princess Mingzhu frowned slightly. She had not thought of this possibility before. Initially, she thought that this person was the weakest among the rank 3 people. Therefore, she had a high chance of winning if she teamed up with Xiaoyang. However, it seemed that she had been wrong. The opponent's ability was not the weakest. If she teamed up with Xiaoyang now, her chances of winning would be reduced by more than half. However, Princess Mingzhu's brows were filled with determination. She did not waver because of this unforeseen event. Whether they could fight or not, they would only know after the great battle. It was pointless to worry about so many things at the moment. Those who were not of the same race were bound to have different intentions. Moreover, the opponent was not human. Therefore, there was even less of a chance for them to discuss and return. This battle was imperative. It would not end until one of them died. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and immediately adjusted his state of mind. He became even more serious. Chapter 2181. Now that Bailey Kwong had revealed himself as a ferocious beast, it was beyond Xiaoyang's expectations. This also made him realize that the following battle would be even more difficult. Now that Bailey Kwong had revealed his true form, his strength and defense would be greatly enhanced. It seemed like he had underestimated a level 3 martial emperor. That was why such an awkward situation had occurred. Although there was an unexpected turn of events, Xiaoyang did not lose heart because of it. After all, even though the battle had tilted in their favor, it was not the time to decide the outcome. Until the final moment of the battle, who could say for sure who would win or lose? I've never seen or heard of anything like this before. It seems like I'm still ignorant. Unrivaled God mocked himself awkwardly. Among the 3,000 small worlds, he was considered someone who had traveled to many worlds and was considered knowledgeable. However, it was his first time seeing someone like Bailey Kwong. Such a situation also refreshed his understanding of the world. Even so, it made them realize that the situation had taken a turn for the worse. Even if it was a ferocious beast of equal strength, it would be extremely difficult to deal with it. If they were not careful, they might even die. However, they were now facing a ferocious beast that was even more powerful than them. Its cultivation level was even higher. No matter how one looked at it, it was not an easy task to defeat such a powerful existence. It was extremely nerve-wracking and difficult to deal with. Xiaoyang also understood that the situation of the battle would become troublesome because of this change. However, what else could he do? Things had already developed to this stage. The only thing he could do was to continue fighting. After Princess Mingzhu calmed herself down, she began to ponder and analyze the situation quickly in her heart. After all, if any judgment or calculation were to appear now, they might end up in a hopeless situation. Of course, it was good to be confident. If they were blindly confident and did not think carefully about the mystery behind it and fought mindlessly, the final outcome of the battle would be unsatisfying. Ants, be afraid. Tremble. Since Bailey Kwong had revealed his true form, his voice became a lot louder and rougher. Due to the characteristics of his true form, even his voice carried a hint of intimidation. It was extremely terrifying. Looking at the 3 of them who were at a loss, and one of them who was close to despair, Bailey Kwong began to feel excited. Now he was very satisfied. It seemed that it would not be difficult to defeat them. Moreover, he enjoyed the situation very much. These ants did not know what fear was before, but they would soon understand. Ferocious beasts were called ferocious beasts because they were innately cruel. Now that he saw the worried expression on his opponent's face, he felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. You're talking as if you've won. Xiaoyang's face relaxed. Now, Xiaoyang had completely adjusted his condition. Although his opponent's strength was terrifying, it was not to the point of absolute strength. Therefore, their chances of victory's chance was still very high. As long as they were careful and calculated everything to the extreme, it was not impossible for them to go head-on against Bailey Kwong. Soon after, Xiaoyang waved his hand, and the Thunderfire Divine sword appeared in his hand. When Bailey Kwong saw how extraordinary the weapon was, a hint of astonishment flashed across his eyes. Bailey Kwong did not reveal his true form earlier, so he could not display his full strength. However, he did not know that Xiaoyang had not displayed his full strength either. Are you still going to continue watching the show? Xiaoyang asked with a smile. Princess Mingzhu shook her head and said, Then let's join forces. After saying that, Princess Mingzhu drew her sword, and stood beside Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang asked this because he felt that even if he managed to defeat Bailey Kwong, he would have to pay a huge price. In such a period, it was naturally a good thing to preserve a little more strength. Who could say for sure when there would be an invasion from a foreign enemy? Therefore, it made sense to be more cautious now. With regards to Princess Mingzhu's strength, Xiaoyang naturally trusted her. Their thoughts could be said to be the same. Just by standing there, their auras were different. What a good match. You're like a pair after this battle, Unrivaled God teased. However, as soon as Unrivaled God finished speaking, he felt as if his entire body was being pricked by needles. It was unbearable. That can't be. You're targeting me just for speaking the truth? Unrivaled God complained helplessly. Unrivaled God felt a chill run down his spine as soon as he finished speaking. How fashionable. He felt as if he was being targeted. It was very unbearable. Are you kidding me? You're facing a great enemy now, and you're targeting your own people? Unrivaled God continued to yell. Right now, Unrivaled God's heart was in agony. All he did was speak the truth, but he was being targeted like this. It was really unbearable. Moreover, in such a situation, did they really not consider who their opponent was? It won't be too late to deal with this beast after I tear your mouth apart. Princess Mingzhu's voice became extremely cold as she said. Unrivaled God could not help but shudder when he heard that. He knew a little about his royal sister's temperament. Back then, he did not get beaten up for talking too much. This time, Princess Mingzhu did not sound like she was joking. Seeing that the three of them were still joking around as if they were completely ignoring him, Bailey Kwong was instantly enraged and roared. You guys are too arrogant. You've gone too far. White Bear roared angrily, unable to stand being ignored. Right now, Bailey Kwong had lost his so-called rationality. He only felt that the fact that these people could still joke around in such a situation was completely ignoring him and disrespecting him. If the other party's ability was higher than his, it would be reasonable for him to receive such treatment. However, if the other party's ability was weaker than his and they were still acting like this, he could not stand it anymore. Right now, Bailey Kwong was gnashing his teeth in hatred. He was ready to eat these three ants, crush their bones, and turn them into good nourishment for himself. Chapter 2182. As for the guy with the tougher body, his bones would probably be tougher as well. However, it did not matter as it could be used to grind his teeth. Incompetent fury. Unrivaled God continued to add fuel to the fire as if he was enjoying the show. He was worried that the matter would not be blown out of proportion, so he decided to help. Bailey Kwong's emotions were completely ignited in an instant. This ant was the weakest of them all, but he had the most vicious tongue. He decided that he would let this brat experience what it meant to wish he was dead. Princess Mingzhu felt helpless as well. She had seen how vicious Unrivaled God's tongue could be. Moreover, under such a situation, the word incompetent and furious provoked the ferocious beast to the point where it could no longer control itself. In the next moment, Bailey Kwong could no longer suppress his anger. With a furious roar, he directly slammed his palm down. Although they were far away from each other, a bolt of lightning appeared in the next second as Bailey Kwong slammed his palm into the void, striking Unrivaled God directly. Unrivaled God was scared out of his wits. He fled in a panic, but at the same time he did not forget to yell, "What? Do you think I'm easy to bully? You useless beast. Why don't you go and bully those two instead?" Unrivaled God wanted to provoke him. Of course, he would not take the blame. Instead, he wanted to push all the blame to Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu. Both of them were powerful enough anyway. No matter how angry the white bear was, they would be able to handle it. However, it was different for him. His arms and legs were so thin. Would they not be broken if they were hit? Xiaoyang supported his forehead with his hand. He felt very helpless towards his bad friend, who was already a martial emperor. It was really easy to change mountains and rivers, but it was hard to change one's nature. However, it was only for a moment. Xiao Yang charged forward with his sword in the next moment. If Bailey Kwong was allowed to fight Unrivaled God, he might be hit if he was not careful. If that happened, it would not be good for him to be injured. Princess Mingzhu did not want to fight at first, as she wanted Unrivaled God to suffer. However, seeing Xiaoyang make a move, she naturally could not continue to stand by and do nothing. After all, the slightest carelessness could leave behind future troubles. Moreover, the purpose of their alliance was to cooperate with each other. If they each went their own way, then this alliance would be meaningless. Impudent! Bailey Kwong roared angrily when he saw the two of them charging towards him. He slammed his claw down. Suddenly, countless thunderbolts appeared continuously, bombarding Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu. At the same time, the two of them were surrounded by sword qi. However, they turned a blind eye to the lightning that was constantly surging towards them. It was as if these things could not shake them at all. After Unrivaled God dodged the thunderbolt's attack, he kept patting his chest as he exclaimed, "That was close! That was close!" Xiaoyang is such a good brother. He intervened at the critical moment and saved my life. Soon after, Unrivaled God stopped talking and immediately turned around to watch the battle. It was a challenge that required them to join forces and fight against those of a higher level. Of course, they would have to show their true abilities. Therefore, even though he was merely watching the battle, he could still benefit a lot. Previously, he had been joking around, but of course, he could not miss the exciting part of this battle. Moreover, if he could gain some enlightenment from this battle, his level might improve by leaps and bounds. Enlightenment was especially important in the martial emperor realm. Moreover, Luo Rong was able to break through to the martial emperor realm while Xiaoyang was preaching. If he tried it himself, perhaps he would be able to break through to the next level? Faced with the surging thunderbolts, Xiaoyang was suddenly not afraid. This was because he had consumed the violent ape thunder pill and the thunder fruit to change his body. Moreover, he had adapted to the heavenly punishment thunder calamity later on. He was almost immune to the power of thunderbolts. Of course, he was not immune. The current Xiaoyang could not withstand the heavenly punishment thunder calamity from back then. However, the white bear's thunderbolts could not compare to the heavenly punishment thunder calamity. Therefore, Xiaoyang did not care about the thunderbolts. He allowed them to hit his body as he continued to charge forward. On the other hand, Princess Mingzhu's sword qi was even more powerful. She had an endless supply of protection weapons. As a result, the thunderbolts could not hurt her at all. Bailey Kwong looked at the power of his thunderbolts. One of them took it head-on, while the other relied on external weapons to block it. However, it did not have any effect on them. He was very unhappy. The power that came with his talent did not seem to be able to cause any trouble for the other party. This made him feel a little uncomfortable, faced with a newly promoted small world. It was a great humiliation that he could not crush it with the strength of a third-level martial emperor. Thinking of this, Bailey Kwong became even angrier. He waved his claws continuously, and thunderbolts roared out continuously. It was as if he wanted to blast them into smithereens. However, the cultivation of the two of them was just that. They charged forward unscathed, and Bailey Kwong could not do anything about it. Now that he was close, Xiaoyang's speed increased, and he dashed forward. Plunder like fire! Flaming sword qi appeared continuously at this moment. In an instant, they were densely packed as if they were alive. It was a magnificent sight. When Bailey Kwong saw this scene, he was instantly enraged. He waved his claws once again, revealing his sharp claws at this moment. It was the first time that he was looked down upon by his opponent. Moreover, he had a violent temper. It was even more unbearable. Countless thunderbolts surged out, surging endlessly. At this moment, the thunderbolts and flaming sword qi began to fight. In the blink of an eye, The power of the two sides was destroying each other at an extremely fast speed. Princess Mingzhu stopped when she was more than 100 feet away from Brother White. She held her sword upside down, and one of her hands kept drawing in the void. She looked very casual. However, in reality, there was a big difference. The space had changed as she drew. The flaming sword Qi continued to rain down on the white bear. Its fur was melting, and even its flesh started to turn black. However, there were no obvious wounds. A ferocious beast that had cultivated to a third-level martial emperor had an unimaginably strong skin and flesh. When Xiaoyang saw this scene, he couldn't help but furrow his eyebrows. It was really difficult to do anything now. Such a strong skin and flesh. It was difficult to break through his defense. How could it hurt him? It seemed like a fool's dream. It was extremely difficult. Chapter 2183. Unrivaled God could not help but frown as he watched the battle that seemed to be in a state of panic. He had not expected the beast's flesh to be so tough. They had more or less miscalculated in this battle. On some issues, he had even made wrong judgments. Boom! Xiaoyang was unable to dodge the slap, and he fell to the ground from the force of the slap. A beast's true form was just that terrifying. Although it was not as agile as before, it had become even more powerful as a result. No matter which aspect it was in, it had been greatly strengthened. At this moment, Xiaoyang's heart was filled with unspeakable bitterness. Although he was mentally prepared, he did not expect that the situation would be so dire. Fierce winter sun. At this moment, Princess Mingzhu's attack was complete. She roared and the space seemed to freeze. Even the white bear's body was covered in frost. Above the white bear's head, there were countless flaming sword auras. They were as glaring as the sun, making it difficult for him to open his eyes. Child's play. Do you think you can hurt me with your fancy moves? What a joke! The white bear roared. At the same time, with its body as the epicenter, thunderbolts erupted continuously and spread out in all directions. The chill was constantly shattered and could not condense at all. The flaming sword auras were also constantly being broken by the thunderbolts. However, Princess Mingzhu was just that domineering. So what if you were strong? However, you could not completely shatter the endless flaming sword auras. In the end, countless flaming sword auras poured down and landed on the white bear's head. At the same time, Xiaoyang's body was supported by the world spirit's ingenious technique. With a gentle push, he was sent back into the air to face his opponent. Before the sword auras had finished pouring down, the white bear moved and charged directly at Princess Mingzhu. This was because the woman's body was the weakest in his eyes. Defeating her would be the easiest thing to do. Moreover, the woman's attack was indeed domineering and unreasonable. Since that was the case, he would get rid of the easiest problem to solve. Then, the following matters would naturally become much simpler. But how could Princess Mingzhu be a simple character? Seeing the white bear charging at her, she did not even take half a step back. She pointed her sword forward, and immediately countless golden sword qis rushed out, rushing towards the beast. They were all people who were good at fighting, and they definitely wouldn't slow down their attacks because of a moment of helplessness. They knew very well that the slightest hesitation in such a situation would bring them eternal damnation. Therefore, it was impossible for them to reveal even the slightest flaw. The white bear was protected by lightning, and its skin was even thicker. It didn't care about the golden sword qi at all. It continued to charge forward, as if it wouldn't give up until it broke through. Thunder, movement, fire, plunder. Seeing this, Xiaoyang didn't dare to hesitate. He let out a low roar, and instantly the rest of the people quickly charged forward. If Princess Mingzhu were to face this beast alone, then the situation would become extremely bad. Xiaoyang took a few hits. Because of his tyrannical body and the support of the 10,000 elephant true intent art, he could withstand it. However, it was hard to say for Princess Mingzhu. The white bear seemed to have made up his mind to face the two people's attacks. He didn't care at all and allowed the sword cheese to pierce his body. His momentum was unstoppable. At this moment, Princess Mingju's brows couldn't help but tightly knit together. That was because the brute's bravery was indeed frightening. The two of them were the two most outstanding people among the younger generation of the 3,000 small worlds. When they joined forces, it seemed like they were evenly matched, but the pressure in their hearts was immense. This was because this beast could make many mistakes, but they only needed to make one mistake, and it might become a hidden danger that would cause them to lose. Facing such a situation, they were even more miserable. However, Princess Mingju couldn't retreat. She knew very well that if she did, this battle might end. In terms of momentum, she definitely couldn't lose. Boom! White Bear arrived very quickly. With a swipe of its paw, even though Princess Mingju had used all of her skills, it was still difficult for her to withstand this huge force. She was sent flying backwards. Xiaoyang also rushed over, the two types of sword cheese pouring out and stabbing continuously. The white bears kept disappearing, and many burn marks appeared on his skin. At the same time, Xiaoyang swung his sword, the divine sword piercing directly into the white bear's skin. The white bear's skin was extremely thick, and the sword cheese couldn't penetrate it. However, the Thunder Fire Divine Sword was a middle-grade, spiritual-level magic weapon. Naturally, it wouldn't be a problem for it to pierce his body. Thunder Dragon Roar of 1,000 poisons. Xiaoyang growled and released his power continuously. Are you trying to tickle me? Bailey Kwong roared furiously. Immediately, he slapped Xiaoyang and sent him flying. Unrivaled God was dumbfounded as he watched. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. Just now, it looked like they were evenly matched. But now it was a one-sided crushing. After Bailey Kwong revealed his true form, the strength he displayed was even more shocking and incomprehensible. This was the advantage of a ferocious beast. I'm naturally close to thunder and lightning. How stupid are you to attack me like that? Bailey Kwong sneered. Xiaoyang turned around immediately and stood with his sword in hand, looking as energetic as ever. You've already lost, Xiaoyang replied with a sneer. After hearing this, Bailey Kwong was puzzled at first. However, he didn't realize what was happening to his body and laughed disdainfully. He was just trying to be mysterious and mystifying. At this moment, Princess Mingju had also stabilized herself. At the same time, she raised her sword again and began to accumulate power for her next attack. There was no compromise between them. There was only battle. Her opponent's advantage was too great. Princess Mingju had to seize every opportunity. She didn't have time to breathe. She had to attack wildly to force her opponent to make a mistake. Then they could use that to defeat him. What's the point of saying so much? You're no match for me. Bailey Kwong roared angrily. After saying that, Bailey Kwong started moving again. This battle had dragged on for too long, so he had to end it quickly to avoid any more complications. Thunderstorm World. Chapter 2184. Bailey Kwong stood high in the sky and roared. With him as the center, countless lightning bolts spread out. The momentum was so great that even the people in the flowing cloud realm below could feel it. Countless cultivators began to tremble involuntarily. It was obvious how terrifying the power was. It made them tremble with fear. The countless lightning bolts spread out at an extremely fast speed. It was as if everything within 100 miles was going to be struck by lightning. It looked like there was no way to resist, feeling the powerful force coming at him. Xiaoyang could not help but frown. Soon after, he frowned and shook the divine sword in his hand. Immediately, several strands of sword intent poured out. In the blink of an eye, how could there be so much time to hesitate? It was also very important to react on the spot. Green Sky Sword Rain. Princess Mingju roared and took the lead. She held the sword in her hand, and countless sword essences appeared as if they were unstoppable. Countless streaks of sword chi appeared above the giant white bear's head. In the next moment, the streaks of sword chi rained down like a storm. Bailey Kwong looked up and saw the countless sword essences pouring down. A disdainful smile appeared on his face. This was because in his eyes it was still a child's play. How could the seemingly weak sword essences hurt him? However, as the sword essences gradually approached him, a sense of horror appeared in his heart. This was because he did not expect the strength of these people to be so terrifying. Although the sword essences could not cause any fatal damage to him, they could break his skin. Bailey Kwong had no choice but to stop underestimating them. He did not know much about this newly ascended realm. He could not afford to fail miserably. Soon after, Bailey Kwong let out a low roar. Immediately, his pair of sharp claws pushed upwards in a frenzy. Immediately, streams of spiritual energy gushed out and formed a barrier in an instant, covering his entire body. He wanted to see how strong these people from the small realm were, and how strong they were. In an instant, the rain of swords arrived. Moreover, they fell at an extremely fast speed, causing the barrier to flicker as if it was about to shatter. When Bailey Kwong saw this scene, his heart was filled with shock. He had never thought that a little girl at the second-order Martial King realm would have such a sharp sword chi. Even his defensive technique was almost unable to withstand it. This caused Bailey Kwong to become even more anxious. If this continued, there was no telling what would happen next. Therefore, he growled and no longer held back his energy. He allowed it to pour out of him. Since your swordsmanship is exquisite, I will not hold back anymore. I will crush you with absolute strength. This was not a difficult thing to do. In the blink of an eye, a storm began to spread out. The sound of the lightning became even crazier. Even though Xiaoyang had a breath of spiritual energy to protect his body, and his physique had changed, his immunity to lightning was exceptionally terrifying. However, when the bolts of lightning struck his body, he furrowed his brows for a moment. Even his hand that was holding the sword began to tremble. In the face of such a terrifying attack, he did not dare to dodge at all. He could only let it hit his body, because he knew very well that if he retreated even half an inch, then his attack would be interrupted. At that time, everything that he had planned would be shattered. How could he accept such an outcome? As long as he could defeat his opponent, what was a price to pay? In the end, Bailey Kwong had underestimated Princess Mingzhu. Even though he gave it his all, under the baptism of the countless sword essences, he could not completely resist. As the sword essences poured down, the barrier was directly shattered. Countless sword essences landed on his body, instantly tearing his skin and flesh apart. So what if there was a difference in their cultivation levels? Princess Mingzhu was not an ordinary person. Her swordsmanship was superb, and the sharpness of her sword was immeasurable. Bailey Kwong thought that the people from the 3,000 small worlds who had ascended to the upper realms were mediocre because they lacked opponents. However, he did not expect this to be the case. It could be said that in the 3,000 small worlds who could step into the Martial Emperor realm because of luck, which one of them was an ordinary person. If they were not outstanding in their own way, how could they have reached this stage today? At this moment, Xiaoyang had completed his attack. With a low roar, he stabbed the divine sword in his hand downwards, as if he was going to split the heavens and earth. Lightning prison, true fire kill. Countless thunderbolts continued to appear around Bailey Kwong's body like a cage. No matter how powerful one was, it would be difficult to escape from this cage. Bailey Kwong looked at the lightning bolts that kept coming down and revealed a disdainful smile. He said, "Why don't you learn your lesson? What's the use of this little bit of lightning to me? It's just nourishment for me." After he finished speaking, Bailey Kwong's smile became even more rampant. He felt that all of this was predestined. Although the lady's attack was fierce, it could only injure him. It could not threaten his life at all. As for the master of the small world, who was known to be unprecedented, the power that he cultivated was useless against him. In the blink of an eye, Bailey Kwang's expression changed when he saw the countless flames appearing one after another. They were like ropes and whips as they lashed towards him. Although he wasn't afraid of lightning, he was still a little afraid of the flames that were about to kill him. In an instant, the two forces arrived. When the flames got close, they turned into extremely pure sword chi and shot at Bailey Kwang. Previously, he had used up a lot of energy to deal with Princess Mingju's attack. Now that he was in a difficult situation, he did not have the time to use any powerful techniques to defend himself. As for some small techniques, they were useless. They could not withstand the sword chi that was like a hot knife through butter. Miserable cries rang out incessantly. Bailey Kwang was no longer as arrogant as before when he was attacked by such a powerful sword aura. All he felt was a heart-burning pain that was difficult to resist. Chapter 2185. Xiaoyang had retreated to the side. He clutched his chest and looked like he was in great pain. However, his eyes were fixed on the white bear. Previously, Xiaoyang had already been seriously injured by the countless thunderbolts. However, because he had to complete his attack, he could not retreat even half an inch. Thus, he forcefully endured the attacks. After unleashing the attack that he thought would decide the outcome of the battle, he felt like everything was about to end. Princess Mingju had retreated to the side as well. She did not have it easy either. Under the violent lightning strikes, she was not lucky enough to escape and was severely injured. The two of them had a tacit understanding. They had both brought out their best skills. However, it was hard to say if they could defeat their opponent. Of course, if they could not, then they would have to continue fighting. After all, this was their territory. How could they allow this animal to do as it pleased here? Since they had already made their move, it was naturally impossible for this matter to end peacefully. Therefore, the two of them had a tacit understanding. Against a strong enemy, they had to respond with the toughest attitude. After this battle, they had to let the other worlds know their attitude. So what if they were from the 3,000 small worlds? This did not mean they were pushovers who could be bullied by anyone. Therefore, no matter what, they had to display their own attitude. They had to let everyone know that even if they were weak, so what? It didn't matter. The only thing they could do was to show their unyielding side. If you dare to come, then your teeth will be broken. In the drifting cloud realm, Chu Taiyin, Ji Fei, and the others watched the battle in the sky. They could not help but tremble in fear. This time, they did not dare to go up and watch the battle, because they knew very well that this was a battle of life and death. It was not a simple sparring session. If they rashly checked it out, they might even lose their lives. Shen Wushuang, who had retreated to hundreds of miles away, was still in a state of shock. The explosion of lightning from before had almost affected him. He had only just stepped into the martial emperor realm, and his physical body was not his forte. How could he dare to challenge him? Therefore, he had no choice but to quickly retreat in order to avoid disaster. It could be said that if unrivaled God had hesitated just now, the consequences might have been extremely terrifying. He might even have to pay a price for it. The gigantic white bear seemed to have gone berserk under the attack of the lightning and flames, and it continued to fight back. In an instant, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingju's expressions became serious. The reason for that was because they could sense that the power that the bastard had unleashed was extremely terrifying. Break! Bailey Kwang let out a low roar. Immediately, the lightning and flames surrounding him were all shattered and no longer existed. At this moment, the white bear's posture also underwent a drastic change. His originally snow-white hair was now completely gone. After being bombarded countless times, he had been burned to ashes. As for his flesh, it was also a terrible sight. Scorch marks and sword marks were everywhere. Under the joint attack of Xiaoyang and Princess Mingju, he had suffered an extremely heavy blow. Perhaps even Bailey Kwong himself did not expect that the two of them could force him to this extent by working together. Could it be that these two people were really monsters? He could not figure this out and did not understand what was going on. How could the strength of these two be second-level martial emperors? They were even comparable to the weakest martial emperor realm level 3. If Bailey Kwong had calmed down, he would have been able to figure out what was going on. However, how could he calm down now? He even wanted to skin them alive and tear their bones apart. In an instant, Bailey Kwong's eyes turned blood-red, as if two flames were rising from them. The monstrous, murderous intent was not concealed at all. It spread wildly. Bailey Kwong was truly enraged now, and he had lost his mind. How could he be happy after being forced to this extent by two people whose cultivation levels were lower than his? When had he, Bailey Kwong, ever suffered such grievances? The two of you are indeed powerful, but I will tear you into pieces. Bailey Kwong roared angrily as he spoke. In fact, his demeanor seemed to have become even more deranged. Bailey Kwong could not remain calm now. Although he had cultivated into a human form, it was still difficult to change his nature. Do you think you can win like this? Xiaoyang suddenly put away his divine sword and asked with a cold smile. With this question, everyone's expression couldn't help but be startled. How could the current him be so calm and unruffled like an ancient well? Or did he really have something up his sleeve? Was that why he was so calm? Countless questions surfaced in Bailey Kwong's heart. Why did this brat suddenly put away his weapon? What was the meaning of this? Princess Mingzhu also put away her weapon because she trusted Xiaoyang very much. Since he was so calm and confident, it meant that he had something up his sleeve. Otherwise, why would he disregard his own safety now? Unrivaled God scratched his head in confusion. He also felt that this was a little unbelievable. However, he could not explain why. This was because he did not see any victory or defeat in the previous battle. Or could it be that Xiaoyang had done it secretly so it was difficult to discover? Bailey Kwong was no longer in the mood to continue thinking. He didn't care if the other party was deliberately mystifying him or if they were serious. He only wanted to use his claws to smash the bodies of these two people into smithereens. He wanted to let them know that offending him would not end well. Both of you prepare to die. Don't talk nonsense. Bailey Kwong shouted angrily. Then he jumped up and charged toward Xiaoyang in a murderous manner. Immediately, countless thunderbolts erupted at this moment. These thunderbolts were like Bailey Kwong's fury. They were venting wildly and looked as if they could not wait to blast Lin Huang into pieces. Princess Mingzhu's expression turned solemn again when she saw this. She did not know if she should attack, or if she believed in him. At this moment, Xiaoyang only smiled and snapped his fingers. Chapter 2186. Such an action did seem a little strange. Even unrivaled God could not help but wonder if there was something wrong with Xiaoyang's brain. Bailey Kwong did not care about this detail. He had never thought highly of these humans. He even thought that they were just deliberately mystifying him. If he was really afraid, he would have fallen into their trap. Now that he had charged over and killed them, everything would be fine. Everything would return to tranquility. At that time, he would ruthlessly exploit their world and let them know that the consequences of disobedience would be even more tragic. However, all of this did not go according to Bailey Kwong's plan. That was because he soon felt something strange. His strength seemed to be fading away. His body was frozen in place, unable to move forward. It was as if there was an extremely terrifying force holding him in place. Princess Mingzhu and Unrivaled God could not help but feel astonished when they saw this. They now understood that Xiaoyang was indeed confident, which was why he looked so relaxed. They had no idea when the opportunity for victory had been planted. The two of them could not help but smile bitterly and shake their heads. They now had a whole new level of respect for the 10th martial emperor of the 3,000 small worlds. Just how many secrets were hidden in his body? They did not know, but they were sure that if they could rope him in as their ally, it would be a great deal. Xiaoyang stood there as if nothing had happened. After all of this was within his expectations. Naturally, he would not be too surprised or astonished. "What did you do?" Bailey Kwong roared furiously. Bailey Kwong felt terrible. At the same time, he also felt that his spiritual meridians were being corroded by a mysterious force. More than half of his organs had been corroded, and his meridians were broken. When did all of this start? He did not know, which was why he was in so much pain now. Bailey Kwong was even more horrified when he felt his body, blood, and even his spiritual meridians slowly disappearing. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and dispel this technique. Otherwise, this sovereign will make you beg for death. Bailey Kwong became somewhat hysterical. He had never expected the changes that were taking place before him. In the face of Bailey Kwong's threat, Xiaoyang snorted disdainfully. Now that his life was hanging by a thread and completely in his hands, he still dared to threaten him. Was there something wrong with his head? Or could it be that these people were used to living like princes and felt that their status was high enough, so they did everything without any scruples? Unrivaled God could not help but laugh as well. He thought that what this person said was truly laughable. He really didn't know where they got their confidence from to dare to speak like this. Princess Mingzhu didn't look at the beast again. Instead, she looked at Xiaoyang. This young man had indeed brought them too many surprises. Just how many secrets were hidden behind him? This was what Princess Mingzhu wanted to know. This person's methods seemed to always be like this, inexhaustible and inexhaustible. Seeing that Xiaoyang was ignoring him and even mocking him, Bailey Kwong was instantly enraged. This was because he really could not understand why this ant would threaten him. Are you really going to fight to the death? Bailey Kwong roared angrily. When he felt that his organs were about to disappear, Bailey Kwong could no longer hold it in. He knew very well that if he did not give in now, he might really lose his real body. When you killed my people, there was already a blood debt between us. This debt of blood can only be repaid with blood. Xiaoyang frowned and scolded. If it was just some unhappiness before, it was not unbearable. However, Bailey Kwong had killed the people of the drifting cloud boundary without any explanation. As the sovereign of the world, how could he turn a blind eye to it? So what if Bailey Kwong was a martial emperor? Even if it was only King Wu's disciple who died, Bailey Kwong had to do this. Moreover, this was only the beginning. If Bailey Kwong didn't handle this properly, he would disappoint the people of the world. Therefore, when the battle started, Xiaoyang had already thought of how to end it. Although it would inevitably cause more trouble, he did not think it was a big deal. Bailey Kwong finally understood that this young man would not let him go. If you want to fight to the death, I'll fulfill your wish. What's so difficult about that? Bailey Kwong roared angrily. Faced with such a threat, Xiaoyang could not help but straighten his face. After all, martial emperors all had their own trump cards. If they were not careful, they would have to pay a huge price. The drifting cloud boundary could not afford any big turbulence. Therefore, Xiaoyang had no choice but to be cautious and be on guard. Even Princess Mingzhu and Unrivaled God were ready to attack at this moment. If that bastard really had a fatal attack, they would naturally have to help to prevent more trouble. In the next moment, the white bear's body fell. In an instant, the shadow of a white bear appeared. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws. It was extremely ferocious. Bailey Kwong bared his fangs and brandished his claws. He was like a demon from hell. Princess Mingzhu and Unrivaled God, who were ready to attack, stopped their attacks when they saw this. This was because they did not expect that their opponent would choose to fight to the death like this. Attacking with the god's soul was the greatest advantage of being a martial emperor. When Bailey Kwong realized that he could no longer protect his physical body, he could only bet everything on this and fight with his god soul. If he won, he would possess his opponent's physical body. Even if his opponent's cultivation level was not that high, it would not damage his vitality. However, the corners of Xiaoyang's lips curled up slightly. His smile was full of disdain. Attacking with one's divine spirit would be like displaying one slight skill in front of an expert. Furthermore, Xiaoyang was not even on guard and allowed you to invade his sea of consciousness. He did not even try to stop you. Princess Mingzhu and Unrivaled God were shocked. They did not know what Xiaoyang was thinking. On the other hand, Bailey Kwong was overjoyed. He felt that with the suppression of his cultivation level, he would definitely win the battle of the God Soul. Chapter 2187. After Bailey Kwong's spiritual soul entered Xiaoyang's body, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no sound at all. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. If it were not for the smoke from the battle, everyone would have thought that nothing had happened in the sky. It was just the three martial emperors who were standing opposite each other and talking. Xin Wushuang's expression was still very nervous because he did not know if Xiaoyang could win in this battle of spiritual souls. If he failed, Bailey Kwong would definitely use Xiaoyang's body to rise from the ashes. If that really happened, how terrifying would the consequences be? Xiaoyang's physical strength was already extremely powerful. If he added Bailey Kwong's cultivation level, it would be difficult for the entire alliance to restrain him. On the other hand, Princess Mingzhu put away her sword and put on a very leisurely look. Shen Wushuang did not know, but Princess Mingzhu knew very well that Xiaoyang had controlled the 10 Directions 8 Wasteland map during the Realm of God's Grand Tournament. He had even deceived everyone and left the Emperor God helpless. If they had not found some clues later on, it would have been difficult to discover him. At that time, Xiaoyang's spiritual strength was already extremely terrifying. Now, it was obvious how powerful his spiritual strength was. Therefore, Princess Mingzhu was not worried at all in this aspect. On the contrary, it was exactly what they wanted. Bailey Kwong's actions were really suicidal. If Bailey Kwong had really given up his cultivation level and not risked his life, perhaps they would have some reservations. However, he had left himself a way out. Little did he know that he was digging his own grave. Xiaoyang's expression was still as calm as ever. This was because, to him, it was indeed a small matter. Moreover, ferocious beasts had always been known for their physical strength. Naturally, their spiritual strength would be weaker than a human cultivator's. It could only be said that Bailey Kwong had really lost his mind in his madness. That was why he had made such an unwise choice. Suddenly, Xiaoyang's expression changed slightly. He could feel that Bailey Kwong's soul was indeed very powerful. It was obvious that he had cultivated some kind of technique. No one was a fool. Even if they had lost their rationality, their instincts would not allow them to do something that would harm themselves. It was precisely because Bailey Kwong had cultivated this technique that he made such a choice. "That's all there is to it," Xiaoyang muttered and closed his eyes. When Princess Mingzhu saw the sudden change in Xiaoyang's expression, her expression changed as well. Could it be that there was something going on that caused Xiaoyang to act like that? For a moment, Unrivaled God and Princess Mingzhu lost their composure. The current situation was starting to become a little tricky. Not long after, Xiaoyang opened his eyes and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He seemed rather tired. "I didn't expect this bastard to have some tricks up his sleeve," Xiaoyang said with a bitter smile. Princess Mingzhu and Unrivaled God only calmed down when they heard that. They understood that Xiaoyang had won the battle of God's soul. What had happened before was merely an accident. There was no need to dwell on it. It was already a great blessing to be safe and sound. "Thank you both for your help. Please come to the Drifting Cloud Realm for a visit," Xiaoyang invited them with a grin. Seeing that Xiaoyang was indeed fine and that the big problem seemed to have been dealt with, Unrivaled God and Princess Mingzhu finally felt relieved. If Xiaoyang had really been possessed by Bailey Kwong, how to deal with him would indeed be a huge problem for them. At least, they had no idea what to do at the moment. "Since the battle here is over, we have to report to the God Realm first," Princess Mingzhu said softly. Unrivaled God was initially interested, but he could not help but laugh immediately. That was indeed the case. Now that there was a first invader, there might be a second, a third, or even more. They had to hurry back now and explain the sword situation so that they could come up with a plan in time. Unrivaled God was feeling rather helpless now. He had thought that he would be able to see a wider world now that the barrier was gone. However, who would have thought that a crisis would come? There were a lot of things that couldn't be imagined too beautifully. Reality had always been cruel. If that's the case, I won't stay any longer. Come visit the drifting cloud realm when you're free, Xiaoyang said politely. After all, this was the first time they had encountered an enemy in the alliance. It was not that Xiaoyang was heartless, but this matter was indeed very important. They might even have to discuss it carefully in every world to prevent any problems from arising. They had to take precautions. Although they had already made countless preparations before this, it seemed that they were still lacking in some ways. Therefore, they might have to overturn some of their previous plans. Farewell, Princess Mingzhu said, then turned around and left. Unrivaled God smiled helplessly and said, Come to my house for a drink when you're free. Unrivaled God left quickly after he finished speaking. After watching the two of them leave, Xiaoyang quickly descended and landed in the drifting cloud realm. He landed in Baixing City. When the crowd saw their master land, many of them couldn't help but feel excited and nervous. This was because they did not know if they would be able to get an answer that they were satisfied with. This was an unknown. They could not say for sure, but their hearts were filled with anticipation. They wanted the best answer. Xiaoyang smiled when he saw everyone's anticipation. He waved his hand, and the giant white bear's carcass appeared in his hand. Everyone was shocked when they saw the giant white bear's carcass. This evil creature is the murderer of Baixing City. It has been killed, Xiaoyang said coldly. Everyone began to cheer as soon as he said that. As expected, they got the answer they wanted the most. In the drifting cloud realm, no one's life was worthless. So what if you were a martial emperor? If you killed someone in the drifting cloud realm, you would have to pay with your blood. Xiaoyang felt an indescribable feeling in his heart as he listened to the cheers. It was as if he could not explain all of this clearly. For a moment he had mixed feelings. Suddenly, a gust of cool breeze blew by and carried away the traces of blood, causing the clamor from before to vanish. Xiaoyang grinned. Perhaps everything he had done was worth it. Chapter 2188. After calming everyone down, Xiaoyang headed towards Northern Light City. Along the way, Chu Taiying and Ji Fei could not help but flatter him. Of course, they were not flattering him. Winning the first battle was exciting news for the entire alliance. Moreover, they had completed the battle by working together. Perhaps the cruelty of the 3,000 worlds was not as cruel as they imagined. At least, from the looks of it, everything was going well. What the two of them said was the truth. Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu were the two walls of the alliance's younger generation. Their strengths were the most outstanding, and they could shoulder the burden of the alliance. And this battle also proved this point even more, causing their statuses to rise by quite a bit. It was also because of the start of this battle that Xiaoyang already had a premonition. This matter would not be the end. It would only be the beginning. However, no one knew who would emerge victorious in the end. As a result, he called over Chu Taiying, Ji Fei, Xiao Changxing, and the others. Moreover, he gave them a few instructions, telling them to stand guard in different places to prevent others from taking advantage of the situation. Of course, Xiaoyang was well aware that they were going there to serve as scouts. It would be impossible for them to defend the place. They were all at the pinnacle of the martial king realm, so it was impossible for them to defend themselves against the attack of a martial emperor. As for their garrison, it was more for the purpose of gathering information. Although Xiaoyang could sense any place in the drifting cloud world, he could not focus on every place at all times. If he did, it would be very taxing on his mind. After arranging everything, Xiaoyang returned to his little house. After taking a few pills, he lay down on the familiar rattan chair and began to feel at ease. Then he closed his eyes and began to search for the information left behind in Bailey Kwang's soul. Although Xiaoyang was not very clear about the situation in the 3,000 worlds, Bailey Kwang was born and raised here. Naturally, he was very clear about this. Therefore, what Xiaoyang needed to do was to gather all of this information. That way, he would have some understanding of the situation around him. At least, he would not be in a state of complete ignorance. Although he had sent Muyang out to investigate, it was far from enough. The information they could gather would be very limited. However, searching for Bailey Kwang's soul would make things much easier. That way, everything would become clear. As expected, after a short while, Xiaoyang obtained a lot of useful information. For example, Bailey Kwang came from a place called the World of Beasts. That place, as the name suggested, was a place where thousands of ferocious beasts roamed. Most of the cultivators in the World of Beasts were ferocious beasts. That place was extremely cruel. Those who could grow there were not to be underestimated. Moreover, most of the ferocious beasts, if they were talented, could transform into human form when they reached King Wu's level. However, that was also when they were at their weakest. However, once one reached the martial emperor realm, one would be able to switch between the two realms at will. In the World of Beasts, there were also human cultivators. However, their situation and ending were not good. This was because they were all enslaved. They lived like livestock, enslaved by the ferocious beasts. The strength of the World of Beasts was not to be underestimated. There were many powerful figures. Bailey Kwang was a third-level martial emperor, but his status in the World of Beasts was not in the top 10. In fact, there was a fifth-level martial emperor in the World of Beasts. His strength was even more incredible. There was also a mysterious ancestor. No one knew if he was dead or alive. After receiving this information, Xiaoyang's heart was filled with shock. It seemed that the neighbors around here were evil. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang's heart could not help but become even more worried. There were hundreds of martial emperors in the World of Beasts. The highest level was a fifth-level martial emperor. Now, looking at the entire alliance, the person with the highest cultivation level was the emperor god. His third-level martial emperor was probably not enough in front of that powerful figure. Most importantly, the World of Beasts was warlike by nature. Furthermore, it was constantly expanding and was passionate about waging war on other worlds. In fact, there used to be a medium world in the place where they were now. However, under the ravages of the World of Beasts, it eventually collapsed and disappeared from this world. It was obvious that the World of Beasts was extremely vicious. Being their neighbor would make it difficult for them to live a peaceful life in the future. Even the current Wanshou realm was not at peace. Now they were at war with another world. Fortunately, the other side also had a fifth-level martial royal realm cultivator. That was why they were able to protect the area and not be defeated. However, the other world did not have it easy either. In these hundreds of years of war, they were also miserable. Xiaoyang couldn't help but sigh when he recalled the information. The current situation could be said to be filled with danger. The death of Bailey Kwang would most likely become an excuse for the other party to start a war. It was hard to say. Of course, the World of Beasts had always been ruthless. Sometimes they would suddenly start a war. Even if they did not give any reason, it was still normal. Thinking about these matters, Xiaoyang couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. It seemed that it wouldn't be an easy task to deal with them properly. This made him feel even more uncomfortable. Although everything was uncertain now, who knew when the danger would come? Moreover, with their entire alliance's current strength, it was completely impossible to start a war with the World of Beasts. Perhaps what they would face would be a calamity of annihilation. Thinking of all these, Xiaoyang could not help but feel a headache. The world was ever-changing. Who could predict what would happen next? No one knew and no one understood. Suddenly, Xiaoyang felt a message from his Pisces token. He looked sideways and saw that it was a message from the Emperor God. The message was very simple. He asked him to quickly head to the God world to discuss what had happened today. Chapter 2189. Since the Emperor God had sent the message, Xiaoyang naturally would not reject it. Of course. He also knew that they had to be prepared for today's matter. Therefore, they discussed with each other and passed on the information they had received to them so that they could make a decision as soon as possible. It could be said that it was better to be prepared. Soon after, Xiaoyang formed a hand seal. The void vibrated and a wisp of flame shot out. It wandered around Xiaoyang's body, looking very excited. Xiaohua, who had evolved into a spiritual fire, now had some intelligence and was very excited. He knew that if there was no war, his master would definitely bring him great benefits by summoning him. Then, Xiaoyang casually grabbed the huge white bear's corpse and tossed it to Xiaohua. When Xiaohua saw the huge white bear, he instantly became restless. He was very excited, as if he had seen an extremely delicious meal. Then, Xiaohua's body continued to grow. In a flash, he became monstrous. He swallowed the white bear's corpse in one gulp, the corpse of a third-level martial emperor expert, and a ferocious beast at that contained an unimaginable amount of power. That was why Xiaohua was so excited. This was a top-notch tonic, so Xiaohua naturally would not be polite. The temptation of delicious food was irresistible to anyone. Remember, leave the storage ring inside. Don't eat it, Xiaoyang said calmly. Xiaohua nodded quickly to show that he understood. Perhaps it was because the white bear's body was too big, but Xiaohua's body seemed to be trembling. Looking at Xiaohua's greedy look, Xiaoyang smiled dotingly. Now it seemed that swallowing Xiaohua was a good thing. At least, if Xiaohua wanted to increase his strength now, he did not completely rely on swallowing other heavenly flames. Although Xiaohua's body had become extremely huge, there was no scorching aura. As for the surrounding buildings, there were no signs of burning. Now, Lil Flame was already able to perfectly control his own strength, and it could be said that he could control it freely. Go ahead and digest it well. We might not have many peaceful days in the future, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Soon after, Xiaohua excitedly circled a few times in the sky before disappearing without a trace. After settling everything, Xiaoyang stood up and headed to the God realm. Along the way, Xiaoyang did not stop his technique. Instead, he continued to do so. After all, there was too much information, and he naturally needed to investigate it carefully. How much of this information was useful to him, and how much of it was completely useless? All of these made Xiaoyang very curious. There was a lot of information about the beast realm. White Bear's territory was filled with strong cultivators, and there were more than 10 martial emperors there. In other words, White Bear's forces were already stronger than their entire alliance. After investigating this information, Xiaoyang was even more shocked. It was also because of this that he became a little uneasy. After all, this kind of thing really made one feel helpless. Now, in his heart, he had listed the beast realm in the list of danger, and they could not afford to offend them. In fact, they even had to deliberately keep a low profile to avoid attracting their attention. However, this was just a fluke. Who knew when they would be discovered? Once a battle broke out at that time, even if they were prepared, they would still be caught off guard and unable to defend themselves. Moreover, in Bailey Kwang's force, there were many strong cultivators, and they were very united. Soon after, Xiaoyang found out about a secret technique, which was that they could sense the life and death of their clansmen. After knowing this, Xiaoyang's mouth could not help but twitch. This was because he could foresee that there might be Bailey Kwang's clansmen coming to investigate. That was hard to say. At that time, this kind of thing could not be covered up. Now, Xiaoyang was really having a headache. Originally, he thought that there was still a chance for everything to turn around, but now it seemed that it was just a fluke. The reality was so cruel that he had no way out. If he was strong enough, Xiaoyang naturally had nothing to fear. However, his current strength was still insufficient in front of them. It was even difficult for him to fight against them. If Xiaoyang did not form an alliance with the celestial realm and had to face all of this alone, he would not be able to do it. However, now that he had an ally, with the two of them working together, he might be able to protect himself. Since ancient times, fortune and misfortune came hand in hand. While Xiaoyang was deep in thought, Xiaoyang had already stepped into the territory of the God realm. Soon after, he put away these thoughts and began to think about how to tell the God Emperor about this when the time came. After all, they had gotten themselves into big trouble right from the start. How to deal with it next became the most important thing. Xiaoyang did not even have the slightest idea of what to do now. Due to his lack of strength, he could not fight against them at all. This was like a housewife who could not cook without rice. No matter how strong he was, there was nothing he could do. At the same time, these thoughts made Xiaoyang feel even more helpless. Soon, Xiaoyang arrived at Fairy's capital. He had no choice but to put these thoughts away and went straight to the palace to meet the God Emperor. The God Emperor was still waiting in the back garden. Beside him sat Princess Mingzhu, the God Empress, and the old Prime Minister. "Brother Xiao, you're really something. You're able to face a third-level martial Emperor Almighty without batting an eyelid. You even managed to plant a fatal move without anyone noticing. You're really something," the God Emperor said with a smile. After listening to Shen Wushuang and Princess Mingzhu's report, the God Emperor's opinion of Xiaoyang changed greatly. This was because he also felt that this Lord Xiao was like an enigma. Many of his techniques were slowly revealed, and it was amazing. Although the old Prime Minister had a huge grudge against Xiaoyang due to his setback, he was now full of admiration for him. Such a young man was indeed someone who was qualified to become an ally of the God realm. Back then, he had been too narrow-minded. "You're wrong, God Emperor. If it weren't for Princess Mingzhu's help, I'm afraid I would have been reduced to dust by that lightning," Xiaoyang said politely, giving the God Emperor enough face. Chapter 2190. Hearing Xiaoyang's words, the God Emperor smiled. He didn't think much of it. He also acknowledged his daughter's strength very much. Furthermore, this victory made him even more certain of his thoughts. Princess Mingzhu only lacked actual combat experience. Once she experienced a few more battles of life and death, the talent and strength she would display would be even more terrifying. In the end, he might even be inferior to her. Regarding this, the God Emperor didn't think much of it. His daughter's strength naturally made him proud as a father. As for the fact that his brilliance would be completely overshadowed, it was of no importance to him. In fact, the more powerful Princess Mingzhu was, the happier he would be. After all, this was the only way they could survive in the 3,000 middle worlds. The God Emperor naturally knew a lot about the 3,000 middle worlds from ancient books. He felt that his limits were very low, but Princess Mingzhu's were very high. The heavy responsibility of making the God realm prosperous would eventually be handed to her. The God Emperor suddenly frowned and said, "However, there's one thing that I do not understand. I should have just defeated and sent him away. Yet you went so far as to kill him and even cause his soul to scatter. Isn't this method a little too overbearing?" The old Prime Minister's face darkened because of this. The development of this matter had indeed exceeded their expectations. It could even be said that they had been caught off guard. Xiaoyang couldn't help but frown because the God Emperor's current attitude was a little problematic. He looked up and saw that Princess Mingzhu's expression had changed, but the God Empress was the same as usual. Clearly, this was the God Emperor's and the old Prime Minister's personal thoughts. They hadn't discussed it together, so their expressions were different. This was normal. The God Emperor had many things to worry about. He had been in a high position for 10,000 years, so the things he valued were different from Yi Qingyu's. He killed a citizen of the drifting cloud realm. Naturally, he should pay with his life, Xiaoyang said calmly. Hearing this, the God Emperor didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Would anyone really believe such words if they were to hear it? Because of an unknown King Wu, a martial emperor expert was killed. How could this be justified? At the very least, the God Emperor felt that this was a little ridiculous. The old Prime Minister also had the same thought, because he also felt that it was a bit ridiculous. Xiao Yang was too good at stirring up trouble. He didn't care about the consequences of his actions. He was so brave and ruthless. It was hard to say how much trouble he would cause in the future. Thinking of this, the old Prime Minister became even more worried. Seeing that the God Emperor was still very tolerant and patient towards him, it was not good for him to say anything. After all, the value displayed by this young man was much more important than his old bones. And after experiencing those things, the old Prime Minister's behavior had also become more restrained. After all, the times had changed. If he continued to take advantage of his seniority, he might end up in a miserable state. "You shouldn't have killed him," the divine emperor said. From the emperor god's point of view, Yi Fuqian had already lost his life and the blood debt had already been settled. It was probably impossible for Yi Fuqian to return to Huan. Such a method was indeed somewhat rash. Although it was a momentary pleasure to say it, the final result would only be that the gains did not make up for the losses. Moreover, their alliance had just set foot in the middle world, and their foundation was not stable yet. Everything was like 1,000 things waiting to be done, and they needed a lot of time to develop. However, now that things had turned out this way, it could be said that spilled water could not be undone. Xiao Yang frowned and said, "Why not?" This question left the God Emperor speechless. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. This was a principle that had not changed since ancient times. However, one had to be clear about the situation. Acting rashly would undoubtedly be digging one's own grave. Such a method would only cause more people to suffer a disaster. He did deserve to be killed. Princess Mingzhu added at this time. Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu had always had similar views about this. They felt that only by making a name for themselves and letting their opponents know how powerful they were would they restrain themselves. Otherwise, if they kept shrinking back and being frightened, it would only make others think that they were weak and easy to bully. When that time comes, even if they were to be patient, it would become a disaster. Therefore, their thoughts could be said to be the same without prior discussion. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. Otherwise, why would she go to the drifting cloud boundary if she wanted to settle this properly? However, the God Emperor was speechless. He looked at his daughter and felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. These young people were more impulsive, and their blood boiled. It was normal that they did not care about so much. If they did not kill him, perhaps others would forgive them for the sake of their friendship. However, if they killed him, no matter which world it was, after losing a martial emperor, they would not be able to remain calm and watch. They might come to kill them at any moment. It could be said that this killing had wiped out all the leeway for him to return to the battlefield. Things would not be so good if that was the case. "Father, that bastard said that he wanted to enslave our worlds. Are we supposed to obediently let him do as he pleases and become his slaves?" Princess Mingzhu asked. Hearing this, the God Emperor could not speak of his bitterness. If the other party had really said those words and had such determination, then it seemed that he deserved to be killed. However, such ruthless methods would cost them even more blood in the end. "You guys!" As the God Emperor spoke, he was unable to continue speaking. Then he tried to calm down. After all, he had invited Xiao Yang here to discuss matters, not to condemn him. Their alliance was an existence where one of them would prosper and one of them would suffer. No matter which world was invaded, it would most likely become a springboard for the invaders to invade their God realm. The God realm was at the center of the 3 small worlds. You all should stop arguing. Things are already set in stone, and there is no way to reverse the situation. What is the point of arguing? It is meaningless. Why don't we think about the consequences of this matter and how we should deal with them? The God Empress, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke. Hearing this, the God Emperor calmed down a lot. That was what the God Empress had said. Everything was set in stone. What was the point of arguing about whether to kill or not to kill? Moreover, this was not the 3,000 small worlds. The God realm did not have the final say. Chapter 2191. Let's talk about it when they arrive, the Emperor God said with a sigh. Soon after, everyone fell into silence and did not say anything. However, Princess Mingzhu was very puzzled in her heart. She thought about how wise and powerful her father was back then. Why did he become a little timid after coming to the 3,000 middle worlds? Because of this, he still could not understand what exactly had happened to cause such a huge change to occur in him. Could it be that a person's nature changed because of the change in environment? For a moment, Princess Mingzhu had more and more doubts, making her more and more confused. She couldn't figure out what was going on. The old Prime Minister smiled helplessly, but he didn't make any sound. It looked very strange. However, Xiaoyang sat at the side as if nothing had happened. It was as if what happened just now had nothing to do with him at all. That was why he could be so calm. Xiaoyang naturally understood the Emperor God's thoughts. Their alliance had just been promoted to a medium world, so they weren't clear about everything. They didn't even have the power to protect themselves. If they really got into big trouble, there would probably be continuous wars. By then, they wouldn't be safe. The realm of gods had always been fearless, and the Emperor God was the same. However, as the ruler of a world, his every move was related to the development of the entire alliance. He had to think more and be more stable so that all the worlds could safely get through this weak period. So what if he was a little bullied now? It wouldn't be too late to slowly settle the score with those worlds when their strength increased. Xiaoyang understood this point, which was why he didn't make things difficult for the Emperor God. Although they had different ideas, they could understand each other. Moreover, things had already become a foregone conclusion. Now wasn't the time to find out who was responsible. The most important thing was to discuss how to get through this difficult period together. Moreover, different ideas could sometimes be combined. No matter how the situation changed, they would use the same idea. After all, the plan had never been the same. As the general situation changed, if you didn't change your plans, you would only end up sowing the seeds of disaster and cause even more losses. After 10 minutes, Unrivaled God led Li Fingmu, the Sword Heart Realm's patriarch, and Luo Ji, the Sun Snow Realm's almighty, over. This time, Bai Jian and Luo Rong also came along. When Xiaoyang saw that Bai Jian's aura had undergone a qualitative change, the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. In the end, this friend of his who had gone through life and death did not disappoint him. He had successfully become a martial emperor. Moreover, based on his fierce aura, it was likely that anyone in the same realm as him would have a headache if they encountered him. After exchanging some pleasantries, everyone took their seats one by one. Everyone's eyes fell on Xiaoyang. They already knew why they had come to the God realm this time. Previously, a foreign enemy had invaded and was killed by Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu. This matter didn't seem like a big deal, but it was no small matter either. At the same time, they were secretly amazed that the two of them could kill someone of a higher level when they joined forces. It was extremely terrifying. If that was the case, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that there were two third-level martial emperors in their alliance. Moreover, it was really hard to say where the limit of the two of them joining forces was. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, please tell us everything you know," the God Emperor said in a deep voice. At this moment, everyone's expression became serious. This was because they knew that ripples had appeared on the originally calm surface of the lake. They were afraid that it would be difficult for it to return to calmness in the future. Xiaoyang nodded and said, "The person I killed is called Bailey Kuang. He's from the Beast Realm." Bai Jian and Luo Rong were a little surprised at first, but after seeing the look in their respective elders' eyes, they knew that Xiaoyang naturally had his own unique methods to find out this information. The Beast Realm is an extremely warlike world. Their existence is the same as the dark fighting world that I encountered in the 3,000 small worlds. It can even be said that they are even more overbearing Xiaoyang said in a low voice. Hearing this, Li Fengmu's expression couldn't help but change slightly. He had heard about the evil reputation of the dark fighting world. Moreover, the behavior of the beast realm was even more overbearing than that of the dark fighting world. What kind of situation would that be? It was really hard to imagine. Now, everyone could no longer remain calm. Things were developing so quickly that it was hard to predict. In the past, there was another world where our world was. The destruction of that world was due to the excessive oppression of the beast realm. That's why it ended up like this. I think that's probably the reason why we didn't encounter the battle in the records when we advanced here, Xiaoyang said and laughed at himself. When the Emperor God and the others heard this, a trace of shock flashed across their eyes. However, if that was the case, then all of this made sense. The mystery in their hearts was also solved. Since the battle with them to determine who could stand in the middle world no longer existed, there naturally wouldn't be such a battle. It turned out that this wasn't luck or coincidence. Everything was just a development under a foregone conclusion. However, such a development inevitably made people feel helpless and helpless. In this way, they could also see clearly how inhumane the actions of the beast realm were. Even a world would collapse under their devastation. If it was their world, even if they bowed down, it was inevitable that they would die in the end. The reason why the beast realm is so cruel is very simple. It's because that world is dominated by ferocious beasts. Human cultivators are enslaved there and are reared like livestock, Xiaoyang said, and the bitter smile at the corner of his mouth became a little more dignified. At this moment, everyone's expression became a lot uglier. With such a statement, how could they continue to remain calm? Moreover, it could be said that they had some understanding of the nature of that world. In this way, who would still think of asking for peace? If seeking peace meant death, then it was better to have a vigorous battle. Only then would they be able to fight for a chance of survival. It seems that the beast realm is really not a good thing. Since they are all a bunch of beasts, we should kill them all and get rid of this evil for the 3,000 worlds. Li Fengmu said angrily. Chapter 2192. Everyone knew in their hearts that this could be considered a battle between different races. Most likely, only one side would be able to survive. It would be a battle to the death, and there was no turning back. Moreover, although what the Wanshou realm did previously saved them a lot of trouble in the process of becoming a medium world, they did not think that it was a good thing. After all, there were many things that could not be explained in a few words. The way the Wanshou realm did it was outrageous. Even if they came up safely, they might become the next sacrifice. The Emperor God's face became extremely solemn at this moment. It could be said that the burden on his heart was very heavy. Faced with such a difficult problem, he really felt that he was in a dilemma. No matter how he looked at the current situation, there was no way out. It was also because of this that he knew that this war was unavoidable. By then, it would be difficult for the realm of the gods to develop steadily. It might even be in a precarious situation. The old prime minister was no longer stubborn. He trusted his own allies. Furthermore, Princess Mingzhu had already said that Beili Quang was a wolf with wild ambitions. Every place had its own people. With Beili Quang's attitude, it was enough to see through many things. The division of forces in the Wanshou realm is similar to ours. We are clans, sects, and so on. They are much simpler. They divide the benefits according to the situation of the tribes, Xiaoyang said. Everyone nodded. The composition of forces had always been more or less the same. Although there were some differences in some areas, after careful consideration, one could still see the similarities. The force that Beili Quang belongs to is the White Bear tribe. In the Wanshou realm, it is considered one of the top forces. In their tribe, there are more than 20 martial emperors, Xiaoyang said leisurely. After hearing this, the Emperor God's face changed drastically. It could be said that everyone's face turned extremely ugly at this moment. There were more than 20 experts in a tribe. This was more than the number of experts in the alliance of the 4 worlds. Moreover, this was only a tribe. How terrifying would the overall strength of the Wansho realm be? This was something that was hard to fathom. Without the suppression of the luck, the number of martial emperors that could be born in the 3,000 medium worlds was actually so many. And this point made people feel that it was a little inconceivable. The gap between them was a little too big, wasn't it? For a moment, everyone found it hard to calm down. Such a piece of news was indeed too shocking. Seeing the drastic change in everyone's expressions, Xiaoyang could only bitterly laugh helplessly. He felt very helpless about the development of this matter. After all, the changes in the situation were sometimes so troublesome and difficult to deal with. Rumor has it that there is a 5th-level martial king in the beast realm. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and revealed this important information. After this news came out, everyone's mentality also underwent a huge change. This made them feel even more hopeless. Currently, the strongest person in their alliance was an emperor god and a 3rd-level martial king. However, there was a 5th-level martial king in the opposite world. With such a huge gap, how could they withstand it? For a moment, everyone's hearts were in turmoil. After knowing that the gap between the two sides was so huge, who could accept it? Although this news was indeed despairing, Xiaoyang had no choice but to tell the truth. After all, there were some things that had to be explained clearly. Otherwise, if they were to encounter the Almighty in the future and were caught off guard, the temporary despair would make people feel even more helpless. At least now that they knew, they could be mentally prepared and had a period of time to adapt. They would not be completely ignorant. The Wansho realm can destroy a world. How could they be weak? It's not strange to plunder a world and create a strong person. Li Fengmu sighed and said, thinking about how the Dark Dough world was just a poor small world back then, but in the end, it was able to produce so many 9th-level Kingwu. That was because they had plundered the resources and luck of other worlds. However, the war between the middle worlds was not so simple, and it was rare for it to be one-sided. Therefore, when the Dark Dough world defeated the previous world, it must have expended a lot of energy. Luo Ji did not say a word, because in his opinion, this matter was indeed somewhat mysterious. Moreover, he had only heard all this from Xiaoyang. As for the specific situation, who could say for sure? However, one only needed to do some calculations to know that there was indeed not much exaggeration in this information. Although this was a fact that they were unwilling to accept, they could still guess. At least for now, it's not too bad. Although the situation we are in is not good, it's not to the extent that we can't fight back. At least it's not a top-middle world. Otherwise, we would have no power to fight back. The Emperor God said with a bitter smile. At this point, the Emperor God could see clearly. If they continued to compromise now, it would be meaningless. Since that was the case, they might as well go all out and do what they should do. Why should they think so much? Sometimes, some beautiful ideas were unrealistic. The cruel reality would often break the perfection of one's imagination and make one feel regret. Seeing the change in everyone's attitude, Xiaoyang also smiled. Since everyone had the same awareness, at least their battlefront would still be united in the upcoming war. Now that things have come to this, what can we do? Luo Ji asked with a bitter smile. Under such lamentation, Luo Ji could no longer remain calm. This was a matter of life and death, so they naturally needed to discuss and come up with a foolproof plan. Xiaoyang shook his head. What they could do now was to counter soldiers with arms and water with an earth weir. There was no brilliant way to change the situation. The myriad beast world is indeed very powerful to us now. However, it's not that we can't fight, but when the time comes, I'm afraid that blood will flow like a river. Xiaoyang said helplessly. Although everything was within their expectations, the advancement of the middle worlds had been too smooth previously, which made it difficult for them to accept. Chapter 2193. However, this isn't a hopeless situation. At least for now, we can still fight for the support of our allies, Xiaoyang said. Everyone couldn't help but frown when they heard this. This was because the four of them represented their own worlds, and they had already formed an alliance with each other. Then, who was the next ally he was talking about? Or was it another medium world? After thinking about this, everyone couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope in their hearts. Then, they figured out the crux of the matter. Since the Wansho realm was focused on invading other worlds and plundering their fortune and resources, they naturally wouldn't be idle. As such, after the collapse of the previous world, they would most likely have a new target. Perhaps they were invading other worlds as well. That was hard to say. Right now, the Wansho realm is invading a place called the Inflame realm. The war between them has been going on for thousands of years, Xiaoyang said. After hearing this, the smiles on everyone's faces deepened. Since the Inflame realm could fight with the Wansho realm for thousands of years, it could be seen that the strength of that world was not to be underestimated. If they could have an ally like that, it would be a good thing for them. Moreover, because of the Inflame realm, many of the powerhouses of the Wansho realm would be held back in that place. At that time, even if the Wansho realm wanted to wage war against them, they probably wouldn't send so many powerhouses over. That way, they would have a chance to return and wouldn't be in a constant state of being beaten. If that's the case, we can make use of this, the Emperor God said in a deep voice. If they could find an ally like that, then there was indeed a chance to turn things around, and it wouldn't be too hard on them. Xiaoyang smiled and nodded in agreement. The enemy of the enemy could naturally become an ally. At least, from the looks of it, there was a greater possibility of them joining forces. Moreover, with the Inflame realm sharing the pressure and even asking for reinforcements, the attacks they had to endure would naturally be much weaker. The Emperor God understood that the Inflame realm was indeed a world they could try to form a good relationship with. As for what would happen in the future, that was hard to predict. However, being able to get through the current situation was the most important thing. Right now, we indeed have no way to retreat. That's because Bailey Kwong, whom I killed, has a secret technique in his tribe that seems to be able to sense the death of his fellow tribesmen, said Xiaoyang. In this regard, everyone's reaction was very normal. This was because this was something that they had expected. Even though this was one of the 3,000 small worlds, it would not be easy to create a martial emperor. Therefore, it wasn't strange for them to have methods to know if someone was dead or alive. Even in their sects, there were techniques similar to the eternal lamp, which allowed them to sense the life and death of their disciples. Given the current situation, it seemed as if the clouds and mist had cleared up to reveal the light of day. The worry on everyone's faces also dissipated a lot. Now, everything was no longer hopeless. There were some directions that they could take action in. There were some areas that could be fought for, as long as some details could be taken to the extreme. Then in the end, it might accumulate to become an opportunity for victory. I will arrange for King Da to negotiate with the Inflame world to fight against the Wansho world together. However, before that, I need to go into seclusion to break through to the 4th level martial emperor. Only then will we have confidence, said the Emperor God. The Emperor God had thought about this very carefully. He naturally had a suitable candidate in mind. However, if his strength was not enough, whether the other party would agree or not was a problem. When the time came, they might even come to take a share of the profits. That was all possible. Being too weak was an original sin. Hearing this, the expressions of the old Prime Minister and the Emperor God changed. How long had it been since the Emperor God had broken through to the 3rd level martial emperor? Now he was trying to break through to the 4th level. Wasn't this method a little risky? Moreover, it was like draining the pond to catch all the fish. Even if the Emperor God succeeded, his future cultivation path might be filled with hidden dangers because of this risk. The Emperor God hesitated. She knew her husband very well. Once he had decided on something, it would be difficult to change his mind. Moreover, this was for the sake of the God realm's safety. It was even more impossible to compromise. Thinking of this, the Emperor God's Empress couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. Emperor God, please reconsider. The God realm's safety is in your hands. If you take this risk, the consequences will be unimaginable. The old prime minister hurriedly tried to dissuade him. Even though the emperor god had stripped them of much of their power over the years, when the god realm's survival was at stake and there was the threat of the future, he naturally didn't agree to such a risky method. Emperor God, there is indeed no need to do this, said Li Fengmu. Xiao Yang nodded in agreement. Emperor God, when it comes to cultivation, it's all about following a logical path. If you force it, I'm afraid you won't get any benefits. Moreover, things aren't that bad. Why do you have to do this? The Emperor God waved his hand. Since I have such a plan, I naturally have my own plans. You don't need to worry too much, and you don't need to say anything more. How can I only have so little after accumulating so much in the 3,000 small worlds? At this moment, the corners of Princess Mingzhu's lips curled into a knowing smile. This was her father, the unparalleled and invincible ruler of the world. Everyone was stunned. However, when they saw the Emperor God's determined expression, they didn't dare to continue. It could be said that the Emperor God's actions were for the sake of the entire alliance to tide over this crisis. If they continued to persuade him, it would be pointless. At this moment, everyone was full of admiration for the Emperor God, as expected of the person who started planning for his promotion alone. With the cooperation of many people, he even achieved a goal that many people couldn't achieve. Without the Emperor God, how could there be an alliance of the 4 small worlds? Naturally, they wouldn't appear in the ranks of the 3,000 small worlds. Fellow Taoist Xiao, tell us everything you know. Let us understand more about our opponents and the worlds that we might become friends with in the future, said the Emperor God in a low voice. Xiao Yang nodded. Then he continued to talk about the information he obtained from Bailey Kwang's soul. Of course, he was talking about the direction of the general trend. Chapter 2194. After that, they discussed some specific issues and went back to guard their own worlds. After all, after Bailey Kwang's death, it was as if a storm was about to come. If they left their world without permission, who knows what kind of trouble would appear. Moreover, if they were careless, it might lead to more serious consequences. Under such circumstances, almost everyone was on tenterhooks. Such a long wait could be said to be the most torturous. However, they knew that everything was not completely hopeless. After all, the Emperor God had begun to break through to the 4th level martial royal realm. If he succeeded, the alliance would have one more barrier and one more voice. At least by then, even if the Wanshou realm invaded, they would still have the power to resist. However, at present, everything had not come to fruition, which was still worrying. The chaos in the world was beginning to show itself. They did not spend much effort to break through to the middle world, nor did they shed any blood. However, they did not expect that it would be so difficult to establish a foothold in the 3,000 middle worlds, which made them feel so helpless. Xiao Yang, you're truly powerful. You're able to kill a 3rd level martial king. It seems like your methods are truly not to be underestimated. Bai Jian revealed a smile as he said. Bai Jian had always been ahead of them in terms of cultivation realm. However, the situation was reversed now. Moreover, Bai Jian was very clear that it would be very difficult for him to fight with Xiao Yang. The gap between them had widened so quickly that Bai Jian could not help but feel a little worried. Back then, he was called a genius and was the best in the world. But now, compared to Xiao Yang, he was indeed overshadowed. You are not bad either. You have already entered the martial royal realm. Xiao Yang smiled and said. Luo Rong, who was beside him, smiled and said, Fellow cultivator Bai, why are you so worried? Xiao Yang is a monster, and he is on the same level as Princess Mingzhu. How can we, who are just ordinary people, be compared to him? Luo Rong was very open-minded about it. Back then, when Xiao Yang was preaching in Baixing City, he had gone to listen on a whim. He hadn't expected that it would really give him the opportunity to successfully enter the martial emperor realm. From then on, Luo Rong realized that Xiao Yang's ideas and insights were much better than those of his peers. It was also because of this that he was able to advance by leaps and bounds all the way to his current cultivation level. Therefore, he became the one and only 10th emperor of the 3,000 small worlds and broke through all shackles. When Bai Jian heard this, he laughed bitterly. Thinking about it, that was indeed the case. Back then, when they first met and joined forces, Lei Dingyin, who had the Holy Thunder Hammer, was almost invincible in the Thousand Thunders secret realm. But what happened in the end? Didn't he still lose to a monster like Xiaoyang? Even though Xiaoyang had suffered heavy injuries after that battle and had narrowly escaped with his life, Xiaoyang was still alive. However, they still won in the end. Even if there was some luck involved, it was impossible to be so lucky all the time. Luck, by chance, wouldn't last for long. That's true. I'm just curious about what you've experienced to be able to become like this, Bai Jian said with a bitter smile. It was indeed a happy thing for a friend to become stronger. However, he couldn't catch up to him. This made Bai Jian feel a little disappointed and even difficult to accept. It's nothing. Maybe it's because I faced more life and death situations back then, so it's different, Xiaoyang said with a bitter smile. Naturally, Xiaoyang wouldn't reveal the mystery behind it. Moreover, some things were already in the past. There was no need to brood over it. You know that Xiaoyang is stronger than you. Why don't you work hard to cultivate? Especially you, Bai Jian. Stop admiring the flowers and the moon. Perhaps you'll catch up to him long ago, Li Fengmu said with some dissatisfaction. Bai Jian laughed involuntarily as if he had been poked in his weak spot. His expression turned ugly. Bai Jian admired this old ancestor of the sect. Therefore, he didn't talk back. Instead, he agreed politely. Luo Ji also smiled bitterly and said, "You are the future of the entire alliance. I'm afraid that old bones like us have reached the end. We won't be able to hold on for long. If you can't shoulder the burden as soon as possible and advance to the middle world, it won't be a good thing for the entire alliance. It will be a disaster that will destroy the world." Hearing these words, Bai Jian and Luo Rong's expressions became more serious. This was because they knew that it was indeed so. They were already old, and the path they could take was very limited. Their protection couldn't last for too long. "Maybe the situation isn't that serious," Xiaoyang said with a smile. Li Fengmu and Luo Ji looked at each other and smiled. They also felt that this statement was a little far-fetched. However, they also trusted Xiaoyang very much. Since he could say such words, it meant that he had a plan to deal with it. That depends on when Cultivator Xiao can step into the 3rd level of the Martial Emperor realm, Li Fengmu said with a smile. In their opinion, if Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu could step into the 3rd level of the Martial Emperor realm, their battle strength couldn't be underestimated when they joined forces. At that time, the Emperor God wouldn't be alone. Moreover, the situation they were about to face would only be more cruel. "I'm afraid that's hard to say," Xiaoyang said with a bitter smile. Previously, when he broke through to the 2nd level of the Martial Emperor realm, he could be considered to have accumulated a lot of strength. However, now that he had to break through to the 3rd level of the Martial Emperor realm, it was really difficult. Moreover, because Xiaoyang had condensed 9 small spiritual veins, it was easier said than done for him to break through to the next level. Luo Ji and Li Fengmu seemed to have thought of this point and didn't say anything more. Now, the doubts in their hearts had been resolved. Xiaoyang's condensed 9 spiritual veins naturally had an incomparably vast spiritual energy, which was much stronger than theirs. Therefore, it wasn't strange that he could fight against a 3rd-level Martial Emperor realm cultivator. After a while, the group of people left the divine capital. "Everyone, if there's anything, please help us in the future," Luo Ji said with cupped fists. In Luo Ji's opinion, the Sun Snow realm was currently the weakest. We all have to rely on the God realm. If there's nothing wrong with the Sword Heart realm in the future, this old man will still help. Goodbye. After Li Fengmu finished speaking, he led Bai Jian to the Sword Heart realm. Bai Jian glanced at Xiaoyang and also turned to leave. Chapter 2195. Sect leader Xiao, you don't have to worry too much. Since Ji Fei has already decided to join the flowing cloud boundary, you don't have to be wary of him. Our sun snow boundary is definitely not an unreasonable world. If it wasn't for you, Ji Fei, that kid, would have been consigned to eternal damnation in the divine tomb. You saved his life, so he should repay your kindness. Luo Ji opened his mouth after seeing the people of Sword Heart Boundary walk away. Regarding this, Xiaoyang also laughed involuntarily. Ji Fei had always been in the flowing cloud boundary, and this had almost become a sore point for him. Senior, I was just doing it casually. What's more, people of the same path, helping each other is nothing. Xiaoyang said with a wry smile. Regarding Ji Fei's resolute attitude, Xiaoyang was similarly helpless. He had also persuaded a few times, but the final result was naturally obvious. It ended in failure. Ji Fei could be said to have steeled his heart to join the flowing cloud boundary, which made Xiaoyang embarrassed to continue saying anything. Otherwise, it would appear that he was petty and could not tolerate people. That kid's temper is like that. Besides, I'm also very happy that Ji Fei did that. I don't feel that he betrayed our sun, snow boundary. After all, if a person didn't care about these favors, it would be truly disappointing. In the future, if Sun Snow Boundary is in trouble, Ji Fei will come back to help, Luo Ji said. Xiaoyang nodded slightly. His attitude towards this was still relatively clear. Furthermore, this was how things should be. Back then, Ji Fei came to help, which made Xiaoyang's heart unavoidably touched. But now was not the time. Since even the ancestor of Sun Snow Boundary, Luo Ji, said so, then Xiaoyang naturally had no reason to persuade Ji Fei to leave. Sect leader Xiao, please take care in the future. We will take our leave now. Luo Ji cupped his hands and said with a smile. Xiaoyang also cupped his hands and said, Then I won't see you off. Xiaoyang, come to Sun Snow Boundary to drink when you have time. I have a lot of hidden wine there, Luo Ji said as he waved his hand and left. After watching the people of Sun Snow World leave, Xiaoyang also quickly headed towards Flowing Cloud World. This time, Li Fengmu and Luo Ji had brought along the most outstanding geniuses from their respective families. Their attitude was also very clear. In the future, the heavy responsibility of their respective worlds would be placed on their shoulders. Of course, Bai Jian and Luo Rong were also extraordinary. They were the first to break through to the martial emperor realm among the younger generation. This time he would probably be in existence that would leave others in the dust. As for their future, it was also immeasurable. They were still very young, and it was still unknown how far they could go in the future. The reason why the Flowing Cloud Realm status had risen was mostly because of Xiaoyang's valiant battle prowess. Of course, the most important point was that he was also one of the top figures of the younger generation. Moreover, in the eyes of many people, Xiaoyang's talent was already on par with Princess Mingzhu's. Such a person naturally needed to be befriended. Xiaoyang naturally knew about these thoughts, but he did not think too much about it. After all, their alliance needed to take care of each other. With some relationship, it would be much less troublesome for their disciples when they went out to train in the future. As for cultivation, in Xiaoyang's opinion, if they just sat there and cultivated, the benefits would not be great. However, if they could go to more places and experience more things, then after they gained enlightenment, it would be much easier for them to break through to the next realm. The alliance of the four worlds had now started to become one due to various pressures. In addition to the interactions between the worlds, they had started to establish some relationships. Of course, there were still some conflicts and unhappiness among them. However, compared to the overall situation, it was nothing. Naturally, no one would bother about it. Moreover, these things could not be haggled over. It was the same principle that when the water was too clear, there would be no fish. Sometimes there was no harm in making a small fuss. As long as it was not too much, it could be said that no one would make a fuss about it. Xiaoyang flew high in the sky, and there were more and more thoughts in his mind. At the same time, his heart became heavier. This was because as more and more information came out, his opinion gradually changed. It was true that the In-Flame world had always been invaded by the Wansho world. However, whether they could become friends was still a huge problem. After all, as far as the current situation was concerned, the possibility of that happening was too low. Just as the Emperor God had said, with their current situation, they did not have the capital to form an alliance with them. This was also the reason why the Emperor God was in a hurry to break through to the 4th level Martial Emperor. He wanted to have more opportunities and possibilities. However, man proposes, God disposes. Right now, they could only make a rough estimate. However, when the time came, a small change might cause the entire situation to change drastically. After returning to the drifting cloud world, Xiaoyang immediately summoned the 2 heroes of the Sun family, Qian Guangqi, Xiao Chongxing, and other core people. As for Ji Fei, he was naturally in the same group. After hearing Luo Ji's words, he had already seen through it. He did not doubt the people he used, so why should he worry so much? If Ji Fei wanted to repay his kindness, then he would give him a chance. If he repaid this kindness, he would have less worries in his heart, and he would be able to return with a clear conscience in the future. Xiaoyang also told everyone about the conclusion he had in the God world. At the same time, he also told them about the Wansho world and the In-Flame world. After hearing about the current situation, everyone's expression became incomparably heavy. This was because they knew very well that the problem they were facing now was extremely serious. They could not say when they would suffer from the chaos of war. Of course, they were not that pessimistic. After all, everyone in the drifting cloud world had experienced the invasion of the demon world. At that time, they were indeed very uncomfortable. Back then, the drifting cloud world did not collapse under the flames of war. In fact, it lasted for so long. When Xiaoyang appeared, he successfully drove all of them out and even became strong today. So what if the Wansho world invaded? Moreover, in the midst of war, the speed of a person's cultivation was also not slow. Misfortune and fortune were dependent on each other. However, with their current abilities, it was almost impossible for them to defend the drifting cloud world. Even though they knew that the God world would send reinforcements, they were still a little flustered. One of the reasons was that they had not fought before. Naturally, they did not know how terrifying their opponents were. Chapter 2196. Although everyone was a little panicked at first, they quickly put it aside. This was because they now had the time to make preparations. If they knew earlier, they would have time to adjust their mentality. They would not be caught in the middle of a war and would not be unable to fight in a hurry. There was still a chance and possibility to turn things around. After discussing everything, Xiaoyang asked everyone to leave and do their own things. He mobilized all the cultivators in the world to prepare for the upcoming war. After everyone left, Ji Fei stayed behind. He sat in front of Xiaoyang with a faint smile on his face. "Governor, why did you let go of your worries today?" Ji Fei asked with a smile. Now that Xiaoyang had completely accepted him, this made Ji Fei a little confused. Ji Fei's heart was still quite sensitive. Although Xiaoyang still entrusted him with an important task, he more or less treated him as a guest. However, he no longer felt that way now. This point also made him feel a little strange. Could it be that Xiaoyang had to let go of his prejudices because the Wansho realm was about to invade? Ji Fei felt that the possibility of that was very small. Who was Xiaoyang? He was someone who defied the heavens to fulfill the prerequisite of the alliance agreement and become the 10th Martial Emperor. Sometimes when he had decided on something, how could it be so easy to change it? Therefore, he didn't believe that there was nothing going on here. Before leaving the realm of the gods today, Senior Luo talked to me for a while and told me about your nature, Xiaoyang said calmly. Xiaoyang was willing to be honest with Ji Fei. Since he was sincere, if she continued to put on an act, it would really be a little despicable. Ji Fei was first stunned when he heard this. Soon after, His expression became much more solemn. Ancestor has always known my feelings. I have let him down, Ji Fei sighed. There was a sense of helplessness in his words. Yang Shuirealm had nurtured him a lot, but now he had to repay Xiao Yang's kindness of being reborn. Therefore, he had to abandon his own world. This had also become a knot in Ji Fei's heart. Although he didn't seem to find anything strange on the surface, deep down, he found it hard to convince himself. Ji Fei was such a person. He had countless conflicts in his heart. Therefore, he set a rule for himself, which was to make the choice that came to his mind the quickest. That way, he would not have to hesitate and suffer anymore. This method did make him more decisive, but it was only on the surface. However, his heart was still in a mess. It was very difficult for him to convince himself. Since you have already made your choice, don't be overcautious. That kind of method would only put you in a difficult position and even cause cracks to appear in your mental state. It's not easy to walk out of the divine tomb and be reborn as a human. If you continue to be like before, I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to take half a step forward. Xiao Yang's tone became more solemn at that moment. Xiao Yang had noticed that Ji Fei's state of mind was problematic. Therefore, he felt that Ji Fei had joined the flowing cloud realm involuntarily. That was why he was on guard against him. However, after talking to Luo Ji in the divine world, he had gotten over it. If Yang Shuirealm did not pressure Ji Fei, why should he continue to? If it continued, the crack in Ji Fei's heart would become bigger and bigger. It might even become a moat in the end, making it difficult for him to take half a step forward. It wasn't too late to correct it now. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Ji Fei said with a smile. Since he was no longer on guard, the depression in Ji Fei's heart dissipated by more than half. He could not help but feel refreshed. This world is not black and white. Moreover, we're humans. We are flexible and changeable. So what if you join the flowing cloud realm? Do you have to abandon your own realm? Or is it that after you join the flowing cloud realm, you'll cut off all ties with your original realm? Repaying a debt of gratitude has always been possible, Xiaoyang said frankly. The room was very quiet. Even breathing sounds could be heard clearly. Ji Fei sat there as if he was in deep thought. For a moment, many thoughts exploded in his mind. Countless thoughts popped up in his mind. Let's put it simply. Look at the 3,000 worlds. No matter where you are, you can see the sun rise and the moon rise. However, when have we ever been close to each other? When yin and yang cooperate, it becomes the great Tao, Xiaoyang continued. After hearing this, Ji Fei's entire feelings started to change. Of course, most of it was his opinion that had undergone an earth-shattering change. In the past, his indecisiveness was his weakness. Later on, the method he came up with to solve it was even more arbitrary. However, many things could be looked at and explained from a different perspective, and his current situation was like a dead end, unable to extricate himself. As long as he could take a step back, he would be able to see more scenery and make everything clearer. However, he did not do that. When he felt the power overflowing from Ji Fei's body, Xiaoyang also revealed a trace of a smile. The knot in his heart could finally be untied. As long as he could untie the knot in his heart, then the obstacle in front of him would naturally be removed. Suddenly, Ji Fei bowed down. Before Ji Fei's knees touched the ground, he was already kicked by Xiaoyang. His body smashed into the wall. This kick was done skillfully, which was why the wall did not directly shatter. Since you already understand, why bother doing this? Or do you not treat me, Xiaoyang, as a friend? Xiaoyang berated. Ji Fei hurriedly got up and cupped his fists. He bowed and said, "Thank you, benefactor, for speaking again and allowing a fool to be enlightened. Know the limits of heaven and get rid of evil creatures." Now that Ji Fei had seen everything clearly, the knot in his heart naturally dissipated. He even saw more. Since you've already comprehended something, why continue to waste this great opportunity? The war is imminent. Why don't you seize the time? Xiao Yang berated. Yes. Ji Fei answered decisively. He had an indescribable, carefree attitude. His bashful attitude was also gone.